This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still get goosebumps typing this out. It's been 3 months since it happened, but I can't shake the feeling of being watched. I've moved twice since then, but I still check every corner of my house before going to bed. So I had just moved to this small city in the interior of Brazil called Botucatu. It's not tiny, but definitely not São Paulo either. I found this great deal on a house that had been empty for almost a year. The rent was cheap because it needed some minor repairs, but nothing I couldn't handle. The place had this basement that I never really used except for storage. I work in IT remotely, so all I really needed was a good internet connection, and I was set. I'm a pretty avid gamer. That's how I spend most of my evenings after work. I have this group of friends I've known for years online, and we usually get on Discord and play whatever's popular that month. That night, it was a Thursday in February, we were deep into this new Battle Royale game that had just come out. Around 7 in the evening, my phone kept buzzing with these weather alerts about potential flash floods. It had been raining on and off all day, but nothing crazy. I ignored most of them. They're always exaggerating these warnings anyway. I mean, every time there's a bit of rain, they act like it's the apocalypse, right? As the night went on, the storm did get worse. By around 11, the wind was getting pretty intense. My house was making all these weird creaking sounds, the kind old houses make when they're being battered by strong winds. My friends could hear it through my mic and kept joking that my house was haunted. Just a storm, I kept saying, trying to focus on the game. I was in the middle of a match when my screen flickered for a second. The house lights dimmed, then came back on. I didn't think much of it. Power hiccups happen during storms. I checked my Discord to make sure I was still connected, and everything seemed fine. Then, about 2 minutes later, everything went dark. Complete darkness. The kind where you can't even see your hand in front of your face. Shit, I muttered, feeling around for my phone on the desk. I turned on the flashlight and saw that the power was completely out. My desktop had shut down, my router lights were off, everything. I wasn't too worried at first. Power outages during storms weren't uncommon. I figured it would come back on soon enough. I remembered I had this old battery bank in my office that I'd bought during the pandemic when we had frequent outages. It wasn't anything fancy, but it could power a few small lamps for a couple of hours. I made my way to the office, which was on the other side of the house. As I was rummaging through some boxes looking for the battery bank, I heard something, a sort of shuffling noise coming from behind some larger boxes in the corner. I froze and pointed my flashlight in that direction, but didn't see anything. Probably just the house settling, I told myself, or maybe mice. The place had been empty for a while before I moved in. I found the battery bank and a small lamp and headed back to my bedroom. I set up the lamp on my nightstand. It wasn't very bright, but it was better than nothing. I decided to chill on my bed and watch some YouTube videos on my phone while waiting for the power to come back. After about 20 minutes, I started to wonder why the power was still out. I walked to my window and looked outside. That's when I noticed something weird. All the other houses on my street still had power. I could see lights in windows. Street lights were working fine. It was just my house that was dark. That was strange. If it was a storm-related outage, wouldn't it affect the whole neighborhood? Maybe it was just my circuit breaker. I decided to check it, but first I wanted to see if there were any local outage reports. As I was looking through Twitter for any news about local power outages, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. We are experiencing power line outages in your area. Crews have been dispatched. Estimated restoration time, 2 to 3 hours. We apologize for the inconvenience. I stared at the message for a minute. Something felt off about it. Usually, utility companies have those automated short codes, not regular phone numbers. And the message didn't identify which company it was from, but I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just how they did things in this city. I went back to watching videos by the window, where I could get better reception. The rain was hitting the glass hard, making these tapping sounds that were actually kind of soothing. I was watching some gaming tutorials when I heard it, a distinct creaking sound coming from across the house. You know how you get to know the sounds of your own house? Like which floorboard creaks when you step on it. This was definitely a footstep, and then another. Slow, deliberate footsteps. My heart started racing. I muted my video and listened more carefully. There it was again. Creak, creak. Someone was walking very slowly through my house. I thought about calling out, thinking maybe it was a neighbor who had seen my power was out and came to check on me. But something in my gut told me to stay quiet. Why would someone enter my house without knocking? I got up as quietly as I could, trying not to make the floor creak beneath me. I picked up my phone and turned the flashlight on, keeping the brightness low. Part of me wanted to just call the police right away, but what if it was nothing? What if it was just the house making weird noises because of the storm? I crept out of my bedroom and into the hallway, my phone held out in front of me like some pathetic weapon. The footsteps had stopped. The house was silent except for the rain and wind outside. I made my way down the hallway, checking each room as I passed. Nothing in the bathroom, nothing in the spare bedroom, nothing in the office. Then I reached the kitchen and saw it. The door to the basement was wide open. I never, ever left that door open. In fact, I barely went down there. It creeped me out, and there was nothing down there except some old boxes from the previous owner that I hadn't gotten around to clearing out. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone. I moved closer to the basement door, shining my light down the stairs. I couldn't see anything unusual, but the basement was large, with lots of corners and old furniture where someone could hide. I decided I needed to close that door. I reached out, grabbed the handle, and pulled it shut as quickly as I could. There was a lock on it, just a simple sliding bolt, and I slid it into place. I barely had time to exhale when I heard heavy footsteps charging up the basement stairs. My heart nearly exploded in my chest. Someone had been down there, waiting in the dark. They hit the door with so much force I thought it would break. I threw my body against it, using all my weight to keep it closed. The person on the other side was kicking the door, throwing their weight against it, trying with everything they had to get it open. "Who are you?" I screamed, but there was no answer, just more violent attempts to break through. The lock was old, and I could feel it starting to give. I pulled out my phone to call the police, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely hit the numbers. As soon as I started dialing, the pounding stopped. Just like that. Complete silence. I stood there, pressed against the door, for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two. I was breathing so hard I thought I might pass out. The 911 operator answered, and I frantically explained what was happening. I didn't wait for the police inside. Once I was off the phone, I ran straight out the front door to my car, nearly slipping on the wet steps. I locked myself in and started the engine, keeping my eyes glued to the house. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it hard to see clearly, but I didn't notice anyone coming out. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. 3 patrol cars with their lights flashing. They searched my house thoroughly but found no one inside. The person, whoever they were, had fled through the back door, which they found unlocked and slightly open. The most disturbing part? When the police restored my power, someone had deliberately cut it from the outside junction box. I mentioned the text I'd received. They checked with the utility company. No such message had been sent. The text came from a personal cell phone. Someone had my number. Someone who knew I was home alone. Someone who had planned this. They had cut my power specifically, not as a random target. They knew which house to hit. They knew my phone number. This wasn't random. Someone was stalking me. The police investigation turned up nothing. No fingerprints, no evidence of who this person was or what they wanted. They installed extra security measures at my new place, but it doesn't help me sleep at night. I still wake up at the smallest sounds, convinced someone is in my house. I don't game with my headphones on anymore. I always need to hear what's happening around me. I check my doors and windows multiple times before bed. I installed cameras everywhere, but the worst part is not knowing. Not knowing who it was. Not knowing if they're still watching me. Not knowing if they'll try again. All I know is that I wasn't randomly targeted. Someone chose me specifically. Someone who had been watching me long enough to know my routine, my address, my phone number. And I have no idea why. Story 2. I'm still having trouble sleeping after what happened 3 months ago. I'm not the type to scare easily. Hell, I moved to the middle of nowhere, specifically because I wanted solitude after retiring from 30 years of working my ass off in the city. But what happened that night in Campo Solitario changed something in me. I bought this farmhouse 4 years ago. It's exactly what I wanted. Complete isolation. I'm 44, divorced, no kids, and frankly, I was done with people. My closest neighbor is about 5 miles away, and the nearest actual town is a good 20-minute drive. You have to take these winding dirt roads to even reach my property, except for the main highway that's about 2 miles from here. I'm surrounded by thousands of acres of farmland and forest. The perfect retreat, or so I thought. That day started like any other. It was pouring rain, one of those heavy spring storms that makes the whole world smell fresh. I was sitting on my front porch with a whiskey, just watching the rain come down in sheets across my property. The fields beyond my yard were turning into shallow pools, and I was enjoying the peacefulness of it all. Around 4 in the afternoon, I noticed something in the distance. At first, I thought it might be an animal, but then I realized it was someone on a dirt bike, coming up the muddy road toward my house. This caught me off guard. Nobody ever comes out here unless they call first. I don't get random visitors. It's literally miles of nothing in every direction. The rider was wearing full rain gear and a helmet that covered their entire face. They drove right onto my property, pulling up near my garage about 30 yards from where I was sitting. They just sat there for a minute, engine idling, looking directly at the house. When they noticed me on the porch, they stared for a few seconds, then abruptly turned around and drove back the way they came. I tried to tell myself it was just someone who took a wrong turn. But who the hell would be out dirt biking in the middle of a rainstorm? And why come all the way to my isolated property? Still, I brushed it off. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they needed help, but got scared when they saw me. I finished my drink and went inside to make dinner. The storm picked up as evening came. By 8 o'clock, it was pouring so hard I could barely see out the windows, and thunder was shaking the house. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard it, the distinctive sound of a dirt bike engine somewhere outside. My blood ran cold. I quickly turned off the kitchen light and moved to the living room window. Through the rain, I could just make out headlights coming up the path toward my house. But then something weird happened. The headlights disappeared before reaching the garage where they'd stopped earlier. They didn't turn around. They just vanished. I stood frozen at the window for what felt like forever. Where did they go? Did they cut the lights and keep coming? Did they park somewhere on my property? The nearest house was miles away, and in this weather, nobody would be out here without a damn good reason. That's when it hit me. If something happened, I was completely on my own. Police would take at least 30 minutes to get here, and that's if they could even find the place in this weather. I went to my bedroom and grabbed my shotgun from the gun safe. I've had it for years, mostly for the occasional coyote that gets too close to the house, but I'd never been so glad to have it as I was that night. With the gun in hand, I started methodically checking every window in the house, making sure the locks were secure. My house isn't huge, but it's old and has windows on all sides. 20 minutes of this, and I hadn't seen any sign of the rider. Maybe they'd left. Maybe I was being paranoid. Then I saw something move in my backyard. Just a shadow, really, but definitely someone moving through the rain. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Should I call out? Should I call the police even though they'd never get here in time? Before I could decide, I heard it. Footsteps, not just random steps, but someone deliberately walking around the perimeter of my house. The footsteps would stop at each window, and I swear I could hear someone pressing against the walls, testing them. Each time I'd move to look outside, the footsteps would move away, like they knew I was tracking them. This went on for maybe 15 minutes, and my fear was turning into panic. I couldn't just sit here waiting for this person to find a way in. I came up with a plan. The garage connects to the house through the kitchen. I could take my car, drive around, and maybe catch whoever was out there by surprise. At least I'd have the protection of being in my vehicle. I crept into the garage, shotgun still in hand. I placed it on the passenger seat as I quietly got into my pickup. I started the engine, hit the garage door opener, and as soon as it was high enough, I gunned it out into the rain. I immediately made a sharp turn around the side of the house where I'd last heard the footsteps. My truck has a light bar on top that I use for driving the back roads at night. I flipped it on along with my high beams, flooding the side of the house with light. And there he was, a man dressed all in black, standing right outside my bedroom window. He had a crowbar in his hand, and he was trying to pry the window open. The light hit him like a spotlight, and for a second we just stared at each other, both of us frozen in shock. He was wearing a black rain jacket with the hood pulled up, and his face was partly covered by what looked like a neck gaiter pulled up over his nose. All I could see were his eyes, wide with surprise. We must have locked eyes for only a second or two, but it felt like forever. Then he bolted. I threw the truck into drive and followed him as he ran toward where he must have parked his dirt bike, much farther from the house than where he'd stopped earlier. I caught a glimpse of him jumping on the bike and speeding off into the darkness beyond my property. I considered chasing him, but on these muddy roads, his dirt bike could go places my truck couldn't. I drove around my entire property 3 times, scanning with the light bar, but he was gone. I pulled back into the garage, grabbed my shotgun, and went back inside. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, shotgun across my lap, jumping at every sound the storm made. When morning finally came, I called the sheriff's department. They sent someone out, but of course there wasn't much they could do. The rain had washed away any footprints or tire tracks. The deputy told me it was probably just someone looking to rob what they thought was an empty house. They took my report and promised to patrol the area more frequently, but we both knew that meant maybe driving by once a day on the main road, if that. I installed a security system the following week. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. I've got floodlights all around the property now. I even adopted 2 big German shepherds from a rescue. They're good company, and their hearing is a hell of a lot better than mine. But I still can't shake the feeling of violation. Who was this guy? How did he know I lived out here alone? Was it random, or had he been watching me? That moment when our eyes met haunts me. There was something in his expression that went beyond the shock of being caught. It was like he recognized me, even though I couldn't see most of his face. Sometimes I think about selling this place and moving back to the city, but then I remember why I left in the first place. So I stay, with my dogs and my shotgun and my security cameras. But I don't sit on the porch during storms anymore. And every time I hear an engine in the distance, my hand automatically reaches for the shotgun. The police never found him. They said without a license plate or a clear description, there wasn't much they could do. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for another stormy night to try again. Or maybe he's moved on to easier targets. All I know is that the isolation I once craved now feels like vulnerability. When you're 20 minutes from help, a lot can happen in 20 minutes. I don't regret moving here. This is my home, and I'll be damned if I let some creep with a crowbar take that from me. But I'm not naive anymore about what it means to be alone out here. I still don't know what would have happened if I hadn't decided to get in my truck that night. I don't know what he wanted. Was it just burglary or something worse? The crowbar makes me think he wasn't just planning to take my TV, but it's the not knowing that keeps me awake at night. 3 months later, listening to every creak and groan of this old farmhouse, wondering if tonight's the night he comes back. Story 3. I've never told this story outside my immediate family. Even now, 22 years later, my hands shake a little as I type this. I guess I need to get it out there finally. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar or can make sense of what happened that day. This happened during the summer of 2001 when I was 10 years old. My family had driven to Silver Sands Beach for our annual week-long vacation. We always rented the same little blue cottage about a quarter mile from the shore. That year, my Aunt Lisa, Uncle Dave, and my 6-year-old cousin Emma joined us. That particular day was brutally hot, the kind where the sand burns your feet and the air feels thick in your lungs. The beach was absolutely packed, wall-to-wall beach towels, umbrellas, and sunbathers as far as you could see in either direction. Radios playing, kids screaming, seagulls fighting over dropped chips. Total summer chaos. My parents and Emma's parents had set up our spot about 30 yards back from the waterline. They had the whole setup: cooler, umbrellas, those low-sitting beach chairs, magazines, the works. Emma and I got bored watching them apply sunscreen and talk about boring adult stuff, so we asked if we could go build sandcastles near the water. "Stay where we can see you," my mom said, pointing to a spot maybe 40 feet away, closer to the shoreline. It was still in their line of sight, but closer to the water, where the sand was better for building. "And Michael, watch your cousin." I remember feeling so grown up being trusted to look after Emma. I was 10, double digits, practically a teenager in my mind. Emma was only 6 and followed me everywhere anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. We grabbed our plastic buckets and shovels and headed to the spot Mom had pointed out. The sand there was perfect, not too dry, not too wet. We started digging and building what was going to be, in our minds, the most epic sandcastle ever created. I'm not sure how long we'd been working, maybe 20 minutes. Emma was carefully decorating the walls with seashells while I dug a moat around the perimeter. I remember being completely absorbed in the task, tongue sticking out in concentration the way kids do. Then suddenly, there were two shadows falling across our castle. I looked up, squinting against the sun, and there they were, a man and a woman, just standing there, watching us. I hadn't heard them approach, which was weird because the sand makes that crunching noise when people walk on it. The first thing that struck me as odd was how they looked. Everyone else on the beach was in swimsuits, shorts, tank tops, typical beach attire. But this couple was dressed, well, normally. Too normally for a beach. The guy wore jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. The woman had on white capri pants and a light blue blouse. Both had on regular shoes, not flip-flops or sandals. Nothing about them said, "We're here to enjoy the beach." The second weird thing, they were completely dry and clean. Not a drop of sweat despite the sweltering heat. No sand on their shoes. Their clothes weren't sticking to them like everyone else's were. Their hair wasn't messy from the wind. They looked like they'd just stepped out of an air-conditioned room. "That's a fantastic sandcastle you've got there," the woman said. She had this wide smile that didn't quite reach her eyes behind her oversized sunglasses. Those glasses were another thing. They were too big, almost like she was trying to hide her face. "Thanks," I mumbled, suddenly feeling shy. Emma just kept arranging her shells, barely acknowledging them. The man crouched down to our level. He had shaggy brown hair that fell across his forehead and this weird, intense way of looking at us. "You're doing a great job watching your little cousin," he said directly to me. I didn't remember telling him Emma was my cousin. "How old are you two?" the woman asked, still with that strange smile. Before either of us could answer, the man said, "I bet you're 10, and the little princess here is 6. My stomach did this weird flip. How did he know that? We weren't wearing birthday shirts or anything that would give away our ages. "We have kids just like you at home," the woman continued. "A boy and a girl. They love building sandcastles too." Something felt very wrong. I glanced back toward where our parents were sitting. I could just make them out through the crowd. My dad's red hat, my mom's striped beach towel. They were chatting, not looking our way. "Where are your beach things?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Even at 10, I knew adults didn't come to the beach without towels, bags, or at least a bottle of water. The woman laughed, but it sounded rehearsed. "Oh, we're not staying long. We just came to take a quick walk." The man reached out and picked up one of Emma's shells. His fingernails were perfectly clean. No one's fingernails stay clean at the beach. Mine were caked with wet sand. "This is a beautiful shell," he said to Emma. "I bet you have a good eye for finding the prettiest ones." Emma finally looked up at him and nodded. "I found a blue one too," she said softly. "I'd love to see your collection," the woman said, her voice suddenly eager. "You should come with us. We have a special place just up the beach where you can find the most amazing shells, colors you've never seen before. Not, 'Would you like to come with us?' Or, 'If it's okay with your parents,' just, 'You should come with us.'" A command disguised as a suggestion. The hairs on my arms stood up despite the heat. I suddenly became hyper-aware of our surroundings. The beach was packed, yes, but we were at the edge of the crowd. Just a few yards away, the beach curved around a small bend. If someone walked 2 children around that bend, they'd be out of sight from the main beach area. The man reached out his hand toward Emma. "Come on, sweetie. We'll bring you right back with the prettiest shells you've ever seen." Emma looked at his hand, then at me, unsure what to do. I could see she was tempted by the promise of special shells. My heart was pounding. Every warning I'd ever received about strangers rushed through my head. But I was just a kid facing adults. You're taught to respect adults, not challenge them. I was frozen, trying to think of what to do. I need to tell my parents where we're going," I finally managed to say, my voice coming out higher than normal. The woman's smile faltered for just a second. "Oh, they won't mind. We'll be quick, and it's just around the bend there. You can wave to them on the way." "Come on," the man said, his voice firmer now. He stood up and held out both hands, one toward me, one toward Emma. "It'll be fun." That's when I noticed something else strange. Despite standing in direct sunlight talking to us for several minutes, neither of them had broken a sweat. Everyone else on that beach was glistening with sweat or had wet hair from swimming. These people were completely dry, untouched by the heat. "I really need to ask first," I insisted, taking a small step back. "My mom gets really mad if I don't tell her where I'm going." The woman's mouth tightened. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice losing its friendly tone. "You're coming with us now." Not asking, telling. Emma looked scared now, sensing the change in atmosphere. She scooted closer to me, abandoning her shells. "I'll be right back," I said, then turned and sprinted toward our parents as fast as my legs would carry me through the sand. I didn't look back. I just ran. "Mom, Dad," I yelled as I approached our spot. "There's these people trying to get me and Emma to go with them." My parents both jumped up, instantly alert. My mom grabbed my shoulders. "What? Where's Emma?" "Still by the sandcastle. They're trying to take us to find shells." That's all it took. My Uncle Dave was already running toward where we'd been playing with my dad right behind him. My mom and aunt followed, dragging me along. When we got there, Emma was still sitting by the sandcastle looking confused, alone. The couple was gone, completely vanished. "Where did they go?" my aunt cried, scooping Emma up and holding her tight. Emma pointed vaguely toward the water. "They just went away when Michael left." My dad and uncle scanned the beach in all directions. The beach was so crowded that spotting 2 specific people was nearly impossible. They asked people nearby if they'd seen a couple matching their description, but no one remembered seeing them at all, not talking to us, not standing right there in plain sight. No one had noticed them. We packed up and left the beach immediately. My parents filed a report with the beach patrol, who radioed the description to their other stations along the shore, but nothing ever came of it. No couple matching that description was found. No other children reported being approached. That night in the cottage, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones about child traffickers and predators. Words I didn't fully understand then, but make my blood run cold now. Over the years, I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe they were just socially awkward people who actually did want to show us a good shell hunting spot. Maybe I misinterpreted their intentions. But I can't shake the details that didn't add up. The clean, dry clothes, knowing our ages without being told, the way no one else seemed to notice them, the fact that they vanished so completely and quickly when I ran for help. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, thinking about what might have happened if I'd accepted their invitation, if I'd taken Emma's hand and followed them around that bend in the beach. 2 more children who simply disappeared on a crowded summer day. 22 years later, I still scan crowds for that couple. I still wonder who they were and what they wanted with us. Were they human traffickers, predators, something else entirely? I'll never know. But whatever their intentions, I'm certain we narrowly escaped something terrible that day. Something that would have changed our lives forever if we'd still had lives to live. I'm a father myself now, and you better believe I never let my kids out of my sight at the beach, not even for a second. Story 4. I still can't believe it's been almost 3 years since my stay at Rochester General. I've tried to forget about it, but every time I drive past that hideous concrete building, my skin crawls and I feel this weight in my chest. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but what happened during that one-night stay has made me question everything. It started with something so ordinary. I was cleaning my windows on a Sunday afternoon in April. I'm usually careful with the ladder, but I reached a bit too far trying to get at a stubborn spot in the corner of the upstairs window. Next thing I knew, I was on the ground with searing pain shooting through my right arm. My neighbor Sally heard me scream and rushed over. One look at my arm bent at a disgusting angle, and she drove me straight to Rochester General. The hospital itself is this massive concrete eyesore from the 70s, the kind of brutalist architecture that makes you feel depressed just looking at it. Inside wasn't much better. As soon as those automatic doors opened, that smell hit me, that unmistakable hospital smell that's somehow both antiseptic and sweaty at the same time, with undertones of something plasticky and sour. I'd always hated that smell since I was a kid. After x-rays confirmed I'd broken my arm in 2 places, they put me in a cast and said they wanted to keep me overnight for observation because I'd hit my head in the fall too. I wasn't thrilled about staying, but I live alone since my divorce, and they were concerned about potential concussion symptoms. They put me in room 312 on the 3rd floor. It was small and sparse, just a bed, a side table, and a chair by the window that overlooked the car park. The walls were this dingy off-white color that had probably been white 50 years ago. The floor was covered in those speckled institutional tiles that try to hide dirt but somehow make everything look dirtier. After the nurse left, I tried to get comfortable, which isn't easy with a freshly broken arm. The pain medication they'd given me was starting to kick in, making me feel slightly woozy, but not enough to actually sleep. The hospital settled into that weird quietness that isn't really quiet. Distant beeping, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes in the corridor, the rattle of meal carts. It must have been around 11 when I first heard it, a baby crying. Not a loud, angry wail, but a soft, distressed sound, like it was trying not to make too much noise. My first thought was that it was coming from another floor. Then I heard a woman's voice, just a gentle shh, shh. The sound seemed to be coming from somewhere down the hallway. I didn't think much of it at first. Hospitals have babies, right? But then I remembered the nurse mentioning that this floor was mostly for orthopedic patients and some general surgery recovery. No maternity ward or pediatrics. The crying continued on and off for about 20 minutes. What was strange was how it seemed to move, sometimes sounding closer, sometimes further away, as if someone was walking in circles around the ward, and always followed by that shushing sound. Shh, shh. After a while, it started to get on my nerves. I was tired, in pain, and just wanted to sleep. I pressed the call button, and about 5 minutes later, a nurse appeared. Younger woman, maybe late 20s, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested she was well into a long shift. "Everything all right, Mrs. Jenkins?" she asked, checking my chart. "There's a baby crying somewhere on this floor," I said. "It's been going on for ages. I'm not complaining about the baby, but shouldn't it be in the pediatric ward?" The nurse, her name tag read Claire, frowned slightly. "There aren't any babies on this floor." "Well, I can hear one," I insisted, "and a woman shushing it. They've been going round and round the corridor for the past half hour." Claire looked concerned. "I've been at the nurse's station the whole time. No one's been walking around with a baby." I felt a bit stupid then, like maybe the pain meds were making me imagine things. "Well, maybe it's coming from another floor, the crying and shushing?" Claire nodded, though I could tell she was just humoring me. The acoustics in this old building can be strange. Sounds travel in weird ways sometimes. "I'll go check the corridor, though, just to be sure." She left and came back about 5 minutes later. "There's no one out there, Mrs. Jenkins. The floor's quiet. Would you like something to help you sleep?" I declined the sleeping pill. I don't like taking medication if I can avoid it, and I'd already had painkillers. Claire adjusted my pillows, checked my cast, and left. I tried to settle down again, telling myself it was just sounds from another floor, like she'd said. But about 20 minutes after Claire left, it started again. The soft crying, the gentle shh, shh. This time, it sounded closer, like it was just outside my door. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was something about that shushing that didn't sound right. It wasn't comforting. It was insistent, almost desperate. I reached for the TV remote and turned it on, hoping to drown out the sound. I flipped through channels until I found some old comedy show. I kept the volume low enough that I wouldn't disturb other patients, but loud enough to mask the crying and shushing. It worked, sort of. I couldn't hear the sounds anymore, but I couldn't stop thinking about them either. Every time there was a pause in the dialogue on TV, I found myself straining to listen, half expecting to hear that crying again. Eventually, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was being woken up by a different nurse for morning medication. The TV was still on, showing some breakfast news program. I felt exhausted, like I hadn't really slept at all. When the doctor came by on his morning rounds, he seemed pleased with how my arm was setting and said I could go home. I was relieved. I just wanted to get out of there. As I was waiting for my discharge paperwork, I considered asking about the crying baby, but I felt foolish. It was probably just sounds from another floor, like Claire had said, or maybe even a dream mixed with reality due to the pain meds. I went home and tried to put the whole experience behind me. My sister helped me out for the first couple of weeks while my arm was healing, and life gradually returned to normal. I still had occasional follow-up appointments at Rochester General, but always during the daytime, and I never stayed overnight again. I probably would have forgotten about the whole crying baby incident if it hadn't been for what happened at my niece's birthday party nearly 3 years later. It was a Saturday afternoon in July. My sister had organized a barbecue in her back garden for my niece's 15th birthday. It was a beautiful day, sunny, but not too hot, with a light breeze that kept the mosquitoes away. I was helping my sister-in-law, Margaret, arrange paper plates and plastic cutlery on the picnic table. Margaret works as a nurse at Rochester General. She'd been there for over 20 years and was considering retirement. We were chatting about her work, and I mentioned my overnight stay after breaking my arm. "Which floor were you on?" she asked, placing napkins next to each plate. "Third floor, room 312, I think," I replied. Margaret's hands froze midway through arranging a napkin. She looked at me with an odd expression, part surprise, part something else I couldn't quite read. "What?" I asked. She glanced around, as if making sure no one else was listening, then leaned closer. Did anything unusual happen while you were there? The memory of the crying baby and shushing woman immediately flashed in my mind. Why do you ask? Margaret lowered her voice. That floor has a reputation among the staff, especially around room 312. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm day. What kind of reputation? You'll think I'm being silly, she said, resuming her task with the napkins, not meeting my eyes. No, I won't. Tell me. She sighed. The nurses call her the shush woman. Supposedly, back in the 80s, there was this patient, a young mother with severe postpartum depression and psychosis. The story goes that she... Margaret paused, lowering her voice even further. She smothered her newborn in the hospital and then took her own life. Right there on the 3rd floor. My blood ran cold. I remembered the crying, the desperate shushing sounds that had circled the ward that night. And room 312? I managed to ask, my mouth suddenly dry. That's where I work now. It's been converted to an office space for nursing staff. But strange things happen there. Items get moved. People hear things. She looked at me intently. Did you hear anything, Eliza, when you stayed there? I couldn't speak for a moment. The sounds I'd heard that night came rushing back to me with terrifying clarity. A baby, I finally whispered. I heard a baby crying, and a woman shushing it. Margaret's face went pale. That's her, the shush woman. Some say she's still trying to quiet her baby, still walking the halls. She shook her head. I don't usually buy into ghost stories, but too many people have experienced things in that part of the hospital, especially at night. The nurse I spoke to that night said there weren't any babies on the floor, I said, remembering Claire's reassurances. There wouldn't have been, Margaret confirmed. That floor hasn't had pediatric patients in decades. We were interrupted by my sister calling everyone to gather for cake. Margaret and I never finished our conversation. The party got busy, kids were running around, and it didn't seem like the right place to discuss hospital ghosts. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, lying in bed, I kept hearing that soft crying, that desperate shh, shh in my mind. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamed of endless hospital corridors and a woman in a faded gown, clutching something to her chest as she paced back and forth, back and forth. Now, every time I drive past Rochester General, I can't help but look up at the 3rd floor windows. Sometimes, especially in the evening when the lights inside make the windows glow, I swear I see movement behind the glass, a pacing shadow going back and forth. And even with my car windows closed and the radio on, I sometimes think I can hear it. That soft, distressed crying, and the sound of a desperate mother trying to quiet her baby with increasingly urgent shh, shh. I've never told anyone else about this. Who would believe me? But I know what I heard that night, and sometimes when I wake up at around 11 at night, I feel like she's there, the shush woman, still walking her endless circuit, still trying to quiet her crying baby, still trapped in that moment of desperation that led to tragedy. And I wonder, did she notice me that night? Does she remember me? Is that why I feel watched whenever I pass by that grim concrete building? 3 years on, and I still don't have answers. I just know that I'll never set foot in Rochester General again if I can help it. Some places hold on to their pain, and some stories never end. They just keep circling, like a mother pacing the halls with her crying child, forever trying to make the crying stop. Story 5. I still can't believe what we saw that night. I've been working construction for about 8 years now, mostly commercial projects throughout the Midwest. Nothing fancy, just honest work that pays the bills. My boss, Mike, and I had finished up a 2-week job rebuilding a storefront in eastern Tennessee, and we were making the long haul back to Illinois in his F-350 work truck. It was late October, probably around 11 at night. We'd been driving since about 3 in the afternoon after wrapping up the final paperwork. Mike wanted to cover as much ground as possible before stopping for the night, thinking we could make it to Nashville at least before finding a motel. The mountains in that area are beautiful during the day, but at night, they're something else entirely. Just endless darkness broken up by our headlights. I was fighting to stay awake in the passenger seat. The cab heater was cranked up against the autumn chill, and I had that heavy-eyed feeling you get after working hard all day. Mike had the radio playing some classic rock station that kept fading in and out as we wound through the mountains. We weren't talking much, just that comfortable silence you fall into when you've been working with someone for years. The highway was practically empty at that hour. We'd maybe passed 3 or 4 cars in the last hour, just us, the road, and miles of pitch-black forest pressing in from both sides. Our headlights caught the reflective eyes of something now and then, probably raccoons or possums on the roadside. About halfway through our mountain crossing, Mike slowed the truck a bit. "Roadkill ahead," he muttered, easing off the gas. This wasn't unusual. You always see dead deer on these rural highways. I didn't even bother looking up from my phone at first. But then Mike said, "What the hell?" in this strange, tight voice I'd never heard from him before. I looked up and saw what he was talking about. 2 deer on the shoulder, but they didn't look right. Even in the quick glimpse as we passed, I could tell these weren't normal roadkill. When an animal gets hit by a car, there's usually a clear point of impact. These deer looked like I don't know how else to say it. They looked like they'd exploded. "You see that?" I asked Mike, turning in my seat to look back, but we'd already rounded a bend in the road. "Yeah," he said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Weird. Maybe a truck hit them dead on or something." But even as he said it, I could tell he didn't believe it. I'd seen plenty of deer collisions before. These animals were torn apart in a way that didn't make sense. Their rib cages were splayed outward, like something had burst from inside them. The bones looked jagged, almost like broken glass, and the surrounding flesh was shredded. "Should we turn around and check it out?" I asked, not really wanting to, but feeling like maybe we should report it or something. Mike shook his head firmly. "Nah, not our business. Probably just got mangled by a semi." We drove on, and I tried to forget about it. Chalked it up to a weird glimpse in the dark, my tired mind playing tricks. We crested another hill, and that's when everything went from strange to nightmarish. The road ahead was littered with deer. Not just a few, dozens, maybe hundreds of them. As far as our headlights could reach, the highway was covered in deer carcasses. Some were whole, some in pieces, all of them destroyed in the same bizarre way as the first 2 we'd seen. It looked like a war zone. Mike slammed on the brakes, bringing us to a near standstill. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. The truck's headlights illuminated the grotesque scene in harsh white light. Deer were scattered across both lanes and shoulders. Some lay on their sides, stomachs burst open with intestines spilled across the asphalt. Others were barely recognizable as deer anymore, just twisted collections of limbs and meat. The worst ones were the ones that still looked almost alive, standing frozen with their legs locked, except their torsos had been split open like overstuffed garbage bags. "We can't stop here," Mike said, his voice strained. "We need to keep moving." He eased the truck forward, and the heavy tires crunched over something I didn't want to identify. The sound was sickening, a wet cracking that I could feel in my teeth. I instinctively pulled my feet up onto the seat, as if the carnage might somehow seep into the cab. "What the hell happened here?" I asked, my mouth dry. "This isn't normal. There's no way all these deer got hit by cars." Mike didn't answer. His knuckles were white on the wheel, his jaw clenched tight. I'd known this man for years, seen him handle equipment failures, angry clients, even a scaffolding collapse once. And I'd never seen him rattled like this. As we drove slowly through the carnage, I noticed something that made my skin crawl even more. There were no skid marks on the road, no tire tracks veering off into the dirt, nothing to indicate that vehicles had been involved at all. These animals hadn't been hit. They looked like they'd just exploded where they stood. The smell hit us next. Even with the windows rolled up tight, it seeped into the truck, a thick metallic stench of blood mixed with something else, something acrid that burned the back of my throat. I pulled my shirt up over my nose, but it didn't help much. "Look at their eyes," I said, immediately wishing I hadn't noticed it myself. The intact heads all had the same expression, eyes wide open, almost bulging, like they'd seen something terrifying in their final moments. We'd been driving through this nightmare for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two, when Mike suddenly slammed on the brakes again. About 50 yards ahead, the road was clear, completely clean, as if someone had drawn a line. On our side, carnage. Beyond that point, normal empty highway. "What the fuck?" I whispered. Mike didn't respond. He just accelerated again, eager to cross that invisible boundary. As we passed from the section of road covered in deer remains to the clean asphalt, I felt a strange pressure in my ears, like when you drive up a mountain too quickly. I swallowed hard, trying to clear it. Once we were clear of the scene, Mike floored it. The truck's engine roared as we sped away, the tachometer climbing past 80, 90, pushing 100 on a road posted for 55. Normally, I'd have told him to slow down. These mountain roads were treacherous even at the speed limit, but I didn't say a word. I wanted distance between us and whatever we'd just driven through. After about 10 minutes of driving in tense silence, Mike finally eased off the gas. "You saw that, right?" he asked, his voice rough. "I'm not losing my mind?" "I saw it," I confirmed. My hands were shaking. I dug through the center console for a pack of cigarettes I'd been trying to quit. "What the hell was that? Some kind of disease?" Mike shook his head. "No disease makes animals explode like that, and not all at once. Not in one specific stretch of road. Chemical spill, maybe? Something from a truck that made them, I don't know, react. You see any overturned tankers? Any emergency response? Any fucking warning signs?" Mike snapped, then immediately apologized. "Sorry, man, that wasn't right." We tossed theories back and forth for the next hour as we drove. Military testing, mass poisoning, even some kind of predator neither of us could imagine. Nothing made sense. Nothing explained what could burst dozens, maybe hundreds of deer from the inside out, all in one location, with no apparent cause. What disturbs me most, looking back, is how absolutely confined the event was. One moment, normal mountain highway. Then a half-mile stretch of absolute carnage. Then normal again. Like whatever happened there had boundaries, rules. It felt intentional. We ended up driving straight through to Nashville without stopping, pulling into a motel around 3 in the morning. Neither of us slept much. The next morning, over bad coffee in the motel lobby, Mike made me promise not to mention what we'd seen to anyone. "They'll think we're crazy," he said. "Or worse, They'll think we were drinking on the job. I agreed, and we drove the rest of the way back to Illinois in near silence. That was 3 weeks ago. I've done some research since then, checked news reports from the area, looked for any mentions of mass deer deaths or highway closures. Nothing. It's like it never happened, except I know it did. I can still smell that metallic stench when I close my eyes, still hear the sound of our tires crunching over bone, still see those bulging eyes staring at nothing. I'm writing this now because I can't keep it bottled up anymore. Something happened on that mountain highway that defies explanation. Something that killed hundreds of animals in a way that shouldn't be possible. And the most terrifying part? Whatever did it left no trace except the bodies. It could still be out there in those dark mountains, waiting. Every night since, I've had the same thought before falling asleep. What if it wasn't just targeting deer? Story 6. I've never told anyone outside my family about this, but I need to get it off my chest. My husband Benjamin and I have lived in the same house in Oak Ridge Estates for almost 20 years now. We're both retired, me from teaching and him from accounting, and we've always loved our quiet neighborhood. Most of our neighbors are older like us, so when someone new moves in, it's usually a big deal. About 7 months ago, the Collins house across the street finally sold after sitting empty for over a year. I remember feeling relieved because vacant houses always make me nervous. They attract trouble. The new owner was a young man named Quinn, probably in his mid-20s. The first time I saw him, he was directing movers where to put his furniture. He drove a shiny black BMW, wore those expensive-looking athleisure clothes young people love nowadays, and just gave off this air of money. I'm not normally nosy, but since retiring, I spend a lot of time on our front porch with my crosswords and my tea. Benjamin teases me and calls it my observation post, but it's just nice to get fresh air and see what's happening in the neighborhood. Plus, my arthritis isn't as bad when I'm sitting in my wicker chair with the cushions. Anyway, Quinn seemed nice enough. He came over to introduce himself a few days after moving in, bringing a bottle of wine as a welcome gift, though it should have been the other way around. He told us he worked in the entertainment industry as some kind of freelancer for an internet personality. I didn't really understand what that meant, but Benjamin later explained it was probably something to do with YouTube or those streaming services. It was about 2 weeks after Quinn moved in that I first noticed the pattern. A young blonde woman in a white convertible, one of those sporty ones, would visit his house when he wasn't home. The first time I saw her, I thought maybe she'd gotten the timing wrong, but then she pulled out a key and let herself in like she owned the place. I assumed she was Quinn's girlfriend, which made sense. She was pretty in that Instagram way. Very thin, long blonde hair, always dressed like she was going somewhere important. I later learned her name was Ellie. I saw them together a few times after that, and they looked like a typical young couple. He'd open the car door for her. They'd laugh together walking up his driveway. Nothing that would make you think twice. But then things started getting weird. One afternoon in April, I was watering my hydrangeas when I heard shouting from across the street. Quinn and Ellie were having some kind of argument in his driveway. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but her body language was scary. She was gesturing wildly, her face red with anger, and at one point, she raised her hand like she was about to hit him. Quinn just stood there, arms crossed, looking more tired than angry. Finally, she got in her convertible and peeled out of the driveway so fast I thought she might hit my mailbox. After that blow-up, I expected not to see her around anymore. That's usually how these things go, right? But the very next day, There was her white convertible, parked in Quinn's driveway while he was at work. She let herself in with her key, stayed about 20 minutes, then left. This happened several more times over the next few weeks. I mentioned it to Benjamin, but he just shrugged and said, "Young people these days have complicated relationships." He's not wrong, but something about it made me uneasy. Why would Quinn let someone who screamed at him in public still have a key to his house? About a month after the driveway argument, something happened that I still have nightmares about. Benjamin and I were sound asleep. It must have been around 2 in the morning when we were jolted awake by sirens. Lots of them, and they weren't passing by. They were stopping. Benjamin practically fell out of bed trying to get to the window. "It's Quinn's house," he said, his voice tight with concern. We threw on our robes and hurried outside. The street was lit up like Christmas with the flashing lights from 3 police cars and an ambulance. Several neighbors were already standing in their yards or driveways watching. Nobody knew what was happening, but we all knew it was bad. Then I saw her. Ellie was being led out of Quinn's house in handcuffs. Her blonde hair was a mess, and even from across the street, I could see dark stains on her clothes. Blood. I felt sick. Minutes later, paramedics rushed out with Quinn on a stretcher. There was so much blood. His face was barely recognizable, and he wasn't moving. I was sure he was dead. Benjamin put his arm around me as we watched the ambulance speed away. One of the police officers came over to ask if we'd seen or heard anything unusual that night. I told him about how Ellie would come over when Quinn wasn't home, about the argument I'd witnessed, about my concerns. He took notes and thanked me. For the next week, Quinn's house sat empty again, crime scene tape across the door. Benjamin checked with the hospital and found out Quinn was alive but in serious condition. Nobody seemed to know exactly what had happened. It was 8 days after the incident when Quinn's mother came to the house to collect some of his things. She looked exhausted, with that hollow-eyed expression people get when they haven't slept properly in days. I brought over a casserole, what else do you do in these situations, and asked how Quinn was doing. What she told me still makes my skin crawl. Apparently, Quinn had broken up with Ellie months ago, before the argument I witnessed in the driveway. She hadn't taken it well. The spare key he'd given her when they were dating, she'd made a copy before returning it. He had no idea she still had access to his house. According to Quinn's mother, Ellie had been demanding expensive gifts even after the breakup. When Quinn refused and tried to cut contact completely, she wouldn't accept it. She'd show up at his workplace, send hundreds of texts, and call repeatedly from different numbers when he blocked her. But the worst part, the truly horrifying part, was that she'd been planting hidden cameras in his bedroom, cameras in his house, without him knowing. She'd been coming into his home when he wasn't there, maintaining the cameras, repositioning them, changing batteries, using them to watch him all the time. The night of the attack, Quinn had found one of the cameras. He immediately searched his house and found 2 more. When he called Ellie to confront her, she rushed over. Instead of apologizing or explaining, she attacked him with a kitchen knife. She stabbed him 7 times before he managed to call 911. I couldn't sleep for days after learning this. Every creak in our old house made me jump. I kept checking corners of rooms, looking behind picture frames, examining air vents, anywhere someone might hide a camera. Benjamin thought I was being paranoid, but he still helped me check the house from top to bottom. Quinn stayed in the hospital for 3 weeks. When he finally came home, he looked like a completely different person. Thinner, paler, with this haunted look in his eyes. He jumped at every sound. The confident young man with the flashy car was gone, replaced by someone who seemed afraid of his own shadow. Benjamin and I brought him meals a few times, trying to be good neighbors. During one of these visits, Quinn confessed that he couldn't stay in the house anymore. "Every time I walk into a room," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I wonder if I missed a camera, if she's still watching me somehow." He told us Ellie was in custody awaiting trial, but he was still terrified. "She has friends," he said. "They know where I live." Quinn put his house on the market just 2 months after the attack. It sold quickly. He priced it well below market value, just wanting to be done with it. The day he moved out, I watched from my porch as the moving truck pulled away. He gave a small wave as he drove past in his BMW, but he didn't stop to say goodbye. The new owners are a middle-aged couple with teenage kids. They're nice enough, but I haven't told them what happened in their house. Maybe that's wrong of me. But what would I say? Welcome to the neighborhood, by the way. A psychopath once planted cameras in your bedroom. I still sit on my porch most days, still do my crosswords and sip my tea. But now I'm always looking, watching for white convertibles or unfamiliar faces. I wonder about Quinn sometimes, hope he's doing better wherever he ended up. And every night before bed, I check all our doors and windows twice, because you never really know who might have a key to your life. Story 7. I've been putting off writing this for months now. Honestly, I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes, and Tiki doesn't even like when I bring it up. But I need to get this out there, see if anyone else has experienced anything similar, or if we just had the worst fucking luck imaginable. It was about 7 months ago. Tiki and I had been dating for about 1.5 years, and one of the things that brought us together was our love of the outdoors. We're both pretty experienced campers. I grew up going on trips with my dad in the Adirondacks, and she'd done some serious backpacking through parts of Colorado and Utah. We'd done plenty of weekend camping trips together, but we wanted to try something different. Tiki had this idea to go stargazing in the Saguaro Desert. Neither of us had ever been, but we'd seen these amazing photos online of the night sky there, completely untouched by light pollution. The kind of darkness where you can see the Milky Way spread out above you like someone spilled glitter across black velvet. We were both in a place where we could take off work for a few days, so we figured why not make an adventure out of it. We packed up my Subaru with all our gear, our 3-person tent, we like the extra space, sleeping bags, cooking equipment, about 8 gallons of water, desert camping rule number 1, and enough food for 4 days. The plan was to drive out, spend 3 nights camping, and head back. Easy. We left on a Tuesday morning in early February, when the desert wouldn't be too hot during the day, but still comfortable enough at night. The drive took about 5 hours, and we spent most of it talking about how nice it would be to disconnect for a few days. No cell service, no emails, no social media, just us and nature. We arrived at Vista Saguaro around mid-afternoon. The ranger station was basically just a tiny wooden building with a bored-looking guy who gave us a map and told us to be careful about wildlife and dehydration, the usual warnings. We asked about camping spots, and he mentioned there were some designated areas, but also said a lot of people like to go off the beaten path for real desert camping. He pointed out a few spots on the map where we could park and then hike in to find a good spot. That sounded perfect to us. We wanted isolation, not some crowded campground where we'd hear other people's music and conversations. After driving about 40 minutes down increasingly rough dirt roads, we found a small clearing where we could park. According to our GPS, which we'd checked before losing signal, we were about 20 miles from the nearest town. We loaded up our backpacks with everything we'd need for the night, plus emergency supplies, and started hiking. The plan was to find a spot, set up camp, and then come back for more supplies the next day if needed. The desert was beautiful in a stark, alien way. Massive saguaro cacti stood like silent sentinels, some of them probably older than both of us combined. The ground was hard-packed dirt with occasional patches of scrubby vegetation. Everything seemed to be some shade of brown or dusty green, with the exception of the bright blue sky overhead. After hiking for maybe an hour, we found what felt like the perfect spot, a small flat area surrounded by a few large rocks that would provide some natural windbreak. It was far enough from any paths that we wouldn't see other hikers, but not so far that we couldn't find our way back to the car. Setting up camp was routine for us by that point. We had the tent up within 15 minutes, arranged our sleeping area, and set up a small fire pit using rocks we found nearby. As the sun started to set, we collected some dead wood for a small fire, just enough to cook dinner and provide a bit of light and warmth. That first night was magical. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun went down, but our fire kept us comfortable. We cooked a simple meal of pasta with canned sauce and sat side by side watching the stars appear one by one. By 9 or 10, the sky was absolutely incredible, better than any photos we'd seen. The Milky Way was so bright and clear it almost looked fake, like someone had photoshopped it above us. We cracked open a couple beers we'd brought and just sat in silence for a while, taking it all in. There's something about being in that kind of darkness, that far from civilization, that makes you feel both incredibly small and somehow significant at the same time. Around midnight, we heard something in the distance, a kind of high-pitched, almost screaming sound. It was far away, and it only happened once, so we figured it was probably just a coyote or some other desert animal. We'd done our research about local wildlife, so we weren't particularly worried. "Desert's alive at night," Tiki said, and we kind of laughed it off. We put out the fire properly, always important, used our headlamps to get ready for bed, and crawled into our tent. Day 2 was uneventful. We hiked back to the car in the morning to grab more water and food, spent the afternoon exploring the area around our campsite, and had another peaceful evening under the stars. We heard that same distant screaming sound twice that night, but again it was far away and didn't sound like it was coming toward us. By the third day, we were fully settled into desert life. We'd adjusted to the rhythm of the place, active in the morning and evening when it was cooler, taking it easy during the hottest part of the day. We felt comfortable there, safe. That night, our last night before heading home the next day, we stayed up a bit later than usual, trying to soak in as much of the experience as possible. We'd brought a small bottle of whiskey for our final night, and we passed it back and forth as we pointed out constellations and talked about future trips we wanted to take. We must have gone to bed around 1 in the morning. I remember checking my watch before turning off my headlamp. Tiki fell asleep almost immediately. She always does. But I lay awake for a while, listening to her breathing and the occasional distant sounds of the desert. I must have drifted off eventually because the next thing I knew, I was jerking awake with that sudden heart-pounding awareness that something was wrong. I lay perfectly still, trying to figure out what had woken me. Tiki was still asleep beside me, her breathing deep and regular. Outside the tent, the night was quiet except for footsteps. Soft, careful footsteps circling our tent. At first I thought it might be an animal, maybe a coyote curious about our campsite, but as I listened, I realized the rhythm was wrong, too deliberate, too human. I wanted to wake Tiki, but something kept me frozen in place. Some primal instinct told me to stay absolutely silent. The footsteps completed a circuit around our tent and then stopped directly in front of the entrance. That's when I noticed an orange glow filtering through the fabric of the tent. It wasn't the white beam of a flashlight or headlamp. It was softer, flickering, like firelight. Someone was standing outside our tent with some kind of torch or fire. I reached over and shook Tiki awake, clamping my hand over her mouth before she could make a sound. Her eyes flew open in panic, but she stayed quiet when she saw the look on my face. I pointed at the glowing area of the tent, and her eyes widened even further. We lay there, barely breathing, for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. The orange glow remained steady, and I could sense that whoever was out there was just waiting, watching us through the thin fabric of our tent. Then, without warning, the light source dropped. There was a soft thud as something hit the ground outside, and then our entire tent was suddenly engulfed in flames. The fire spread across the rainfly with terrifying speed. Tiki screamed, and we both scrambled to unzip the tent door. The zipper caught halfway, and in our panic, it took precious seconds to force it down. Smoke was already filling the tent, stinging our eyes and burning our lungs. We tumbled out into the night air, coughing and gasping. The fire was consuming our tent rapidly, the synthetic material melting and dripping flaming plastic. Acting on instinct, I grabbed our water jug that was sitting by the fire pit and emptied it over the tent while Tiki kicked dirt onto the flames. Between the water and the dirt, we managed to extinguish most of the fire, but by then half our tent was destroyed, melted and charred beyond repair. Our sleeping bags were singed, but mostly intact, and our backpacks had been far enough from the entrance to escape serious damage. As the adrenaline of the immediate danger subsided, terror set in. I grabbed my flashlight from my pack and swept the beam around our campsite, looking for whoever had done this. There was no one. The rocky desert landscape stretched out empty in all directions, with no sign of movement or any place where someone could be hiding. It was as if whoever had been there had simply vanished into thin air. "We need to go. Now," Tiki whispered, her voice shaking. She was right. Our tent was destroyed, and someone had just tried to burn us alive in our sleep. We had to get back to the car. We stuffed what we could salvage into our backpacks, not bothering to pack neatly. Most of our food and water was still in the car anyway, since we'd been hiking back each day for supplies. The most important thing was to get our emergency kit, which thankfully had been in my backpack and away from the fire. The problem was it was the middle of the night. We'd hiked to our campsite in daylight, following landmarks we could no longer see in the dark. And while we had a general idea of which direction to go, navigating the desert at night was dangerous. It would be easy to get lost, trip over rocks or cacti, or walk in circles. But staying wasn't an option. Not with someone out there who clearly wanted to harm us. We shouldered our packs. I took out the compass from our emergency kit, and we oriented ourselves as best we could. My watch said it was 3:17 in the morning. If we headed south-southeast according to the compass, we should eventually hit the dirt road where we'd parked the car. The first 15 minutes of walking were tense but quiet. We moved slowly, sweeping our flashlight beams across the ground ahead of us to avoid obstacles. I kept looking back over my shoulder, expecting to see the orange glow of a torch following us. But there was nothing but darkness, and then we heard it. That same screaming sound we'd heard the previous nights, but much closer now. It wasn't an animal sound. Not exactly. It was too structured. Almost like a word being called out, but in no language I'd ever heard. "What the fuck is that?" Tiki whispered, clutching my arm. Before I could answer, another scream sounded from a different direction, and then another, and another. They were surrounding us. We broke into a run, no longer caring about carefully picking our way through the desert. Thorny plants scratched at our legs, and I nearly twisted my ankle on a hidden rock, but the adrenaline kept us moving. The screams continued, sometimes seeming to come from directly behind us, sometimes from the sides, always getting closer. I don't know how long we ran. It felt like hours, but was probably only 20 or 30 minutes. By some miracle, or maybe because we were running downhill most of the time, we eventually saw the outline of my Subaru in the moonlight. We sprinted the last 100 yards, the screams now so close it felt like they were right at our heels. I fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them in my panic, before finally getting the doors unlocked. We threw our backpacks in the back seat and jumped in, slamming and locking the doors behind us. I jammed the key into the ignition and the engine roared to life. As I threw the car into reverse and spun around on the dirt clearing, my headlights swept across the landscape. For just a split second, I thought I saw something, several somethings, moving at the edge of the light. But they were gone so quickly, I couldn't be sure if they were people, animals, or just shadows playing tricks on my terrified mind. I floored it down the rough dirt road, not caring about the damage I might be doing to my suspension. The screams faded behind us, eventually disappearing altogether as we put miles between us and whatever had been chasing us. When we finally reached pavement again, Tiki burst into tears. I wasn't far behind, the tension of the night catching up with me all at once. We drove to the nearest town and found a 24-hour gas station where we parked under the bright lights, feeling safer with other people around. As soon as we had cell service, we called the police. They took our report, but I could tell they were skeptical. A pair of campers spooked by desert wildlife and a campfire accident? It didn't sound very urgent to them. They said they'd send someone out to check the area in the morning, but I doubt they ever did. We drove straight home after that, not stopping except for gas and coffee. Neither of us spoke much during the drive. What was there to say? We'd nearly been murdered in our sleep, chased through the desert by who knows what, and no one believed us. It's been 7 months, and I still don't have any answers. I've researched Vista Saguaro extensively since then, looking for similar incidents or local legends, but found nothing conclusive. Tiki refuses to go camping anymore. Sometimes I catch her staring out the window at night, like she's watching for something. I don't know who tried to burn us alive that night. I don't know what made those inhuman screaming sounds that chased us through the darkness. All I know is that something hunted us in the desert that night, and we were lucky to escape with our lives. Story 8. I don't usually share personal experiences online, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone else has seen what I saw, or maybe writing it down will help me process what happened. Either way, I haven't been the same since that night back in July. I work as a mechanic for a commercial fleet service in Riverton, Arkansas. Sometimes we get emergency calls from stranded trucks, and I have to drive out to fix them on site. Last summer, I got called to Oakdale to repair one of our delivery trucks that had broken down. The driver was stuck with a full load of perishables, so my boss asked if I'd mind heading out there, even though I'd already worked a 13-hour shift. I was exhausted, but the overtime pay was good, and I figured I could handle the 90-minute drive. I grabbed some coffee from the break room, tossed my toolbox in my company truck, and hit the road around 9:30 at night. The weather forecast had mentioned possible storms, but nothing prepared me for how quickly things deteriorated. About 20 minutes into my drive, The radio started buzzing with emergency alerts. The Weather Service was issuing tornado warnings for counties all through central Arkansas. The wind picked up fast, rocking my truck sideways when gusts hit just right. I probably should have turned around, but I kept thinking about that driver stranded with a truck full of food that would spoil. Plus, I'd already gone a good distance, and the storm seemed to be moving northeast while I was heading southwest. I thought I might drive out of it. About 40 miles in, I was deep into the rural stretch of Highway 71. No streetlights out there, just woods on both sides and barely any houses or businesses. The rain started coming down in sheets, and my wipers could barely keep up. I slowed to maybe 30 miles per hour, squinting to see the yellow line. Then the hail started. At first, it was just little pieces, pinging off the hood, but within minutes, they were the size of golf balls, slamming against my windshield so hard I was afraid it might crack. Anyone who's lived in Arkansas knows summer hail usually means one thing: a tornado could be forming nearby. I pulled over to the shoulder and put my hazards on. I couldn't see more than 15 feet ahead through the downpour, and the hail was getting worse. My truck shook with each gust of wind. I cut the engine, but left the lights on, trying to conserve gas while maintaining visibility. Not that it mattered. There wasn't another car in sight, hadn't been for miles. The silence inside the cab felt wrong, with just the hammering of hail on metal and the howling wind outside. I tried the radio, but all I got was static and broken fragments of the emergency broadcast. Cell service showed no bars, typical for that stretch of road even in good weather. Growing. Up here, I'd been taught that if you think a tornado is coming, you should look for a rotation in the clouds or that distinctive freight train sound. I rolled down my passenger window a crack and pointed my flashlight out, trying to see anything in the darkness. The beam just reflected off the rain and hail, useless against the black wall of night. I couldn't see anything to my right, so I turned to check the driver's side, swinging my flashlight toward my window. That's when I saw him. There was a face pressed against my window, not even 6 inches from mine. I'll never forget that face as long as I live. It was a man. At least it had the shape of a man, impossibly tall, as he was stooping down to peer into my window. His skin was so pale it almost glowed, stretched tight over his skull like he was severely malnourished. His eyes were deep-set, dark hollows that seemed to absorb my flashlight beam rather than reflect it. But that smile, God, that smile. It stretched across his face unnaturally wide, from ear to ear, showing rows of crooked yellowed teeth. The corners of his mouth extended far beyond what should be physically possible for a human face, turning up in a mocking grin that wasn't just unsettling. It was wrong on a fundamental level, like looking at something that broke the rules of nature. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stared, grinning. I screamed. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I screamed like a child. My whole body went ice cold and I dropped my flashlight. It couldn't have been more than a second or two, but it felt like minutes that we locked eyes. Then I blinked and he was gone. Just gone. Not running away, not moving out of sight. One moment that nightmarish face was pressed against my window, and the next it had vanished completely. Instinct took over. I fumbled with my keys, started the engine, and floored it, tires spinning against the wet pavement before finally catching. I must have hit 80 despite the hail and rain, driven purely by panic. I didn't care if I crashed. I just needed to get away from whatever I'd just seen. After a few miles of reckless driving, reason started to return. I slowed down, still breathing hard, hands shaking on the wheel. The hail had stopped, though the rain continued. I turned on the cab light and checked all my mirrors obsessively, half expecting to see that grinning face appear again. Nothing. Just darkness and rain. My mind raced with explanations. I'd been working since 6 that morning. I was exhausted. Maybe I dozed off for a second at the wheel and dreamed it. Maybe it was a stress hallucination from the storm and fatigue. Or maybe, and this thought made my skin crawl, someone had been out there in the storm, watching for stranded motorists, waiting for an opportunity. But no human could have that smile. No human could disappear that quickly in an open stretch of highway with nowhere to hide. About 15 minutes later, the storm eased up, and I pulled into a gas station in the next town. My hands were still trembling so badly, I could barely put the truck in park. I sat there for a while, trying to calm down, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Then I remembered. The cameras. Our work trucks are fitted with dash cams, front and rear, for insurance purposes. They record continuously while the engine is running. The footage would show what had really happened. With shaking fingers, I pulled up the camera app on my phone, connected to the truck's system, and began reviewing the past hour's footage. I skipped ahead to the timestamp when I'd pulled over. In the video, I could see myself stopping the truck, cutting the engine, trying the radio. The camera showed my flashlight beam as I pointed it out the passenger window, then turning to the driver's side. Then me, suddenly jumping, dropping the flashlight and speeding away. But there was no face, no grinning man, nothing at my window but darkness and streaks of rain. I watched it 3 times, carefully, scanning each frame. The forward camera showed empty road ahead, the rear camera empty road behind. No one approached my vehicle from either direction. If someone had come from the woods on the driver's side, they should have been visible when I shined my light that way. But there was nothing. I sat in that gas station parking lot for almost an hour, trying to come to terms with what this meant. Either the cameras had somehow failed to capture what was clearly there, or I had seen something that wasn't physically present. I called my boss and told him I couldn't make it to Oakdale because of the storm. He wasn't happy, but he'd heard about the tornado warnings and understood. I didn't mention the grinning man. How could I? It sounded crazy, even to me. The drive back to Riverton was the longest of my life. Every shadow on the roadside looked like a tall figure. Every reflection in my mirrors made me flinch. I kept all the doors locked and windows up, even though the storm had passed and the night had turned still and humid. It's been 8 months since that night. I've researched everything I can about that stretch of Highway 71, looking for accident reports, local legends, anything that might explain what I saw. There are a few stories about strange sightings in the area, lights in the woods, unusual animal behavior, but nothing about a grinning man. I've tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on my mind, but I know what I saw. That face was inches from mine, so detailed I could see the uneven texture of his skin, the variation in his teeth, the utter emptiness in those sunken eyes. No dream or hallucination could be that vivid. I still work the same job, but I've made it clear to my boss that I won't take calls that require driving that stretch of highway after dark. He thinks I'm afraid of storms, and I let him believe that. It's easier than the truth. Sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, that face flashes in my mind, that impossible, stretched grin, and I jolt awake, heart racing. I keep wondering what would have happened if I hadn't started the truck when I did. What if I had just sat there, paralyzed with fear? Would he have tried to get in? Was he just trying to scare me? Or did he want something more? I don't know if the grinning man was human, a ghost, or something else entirely. I don't know if he's still out there on that lonely stretch of highway, waiting for the next person to pull over during a storm. All I know is that I saw something that night that shouldn't exist, something that the cameras couldn't capture. And ever since, I can't shake the feeling that he found me for a reason, that our encounter wasn't random chance but something deliberate. And worst of all, I can't escape the dread that someday, somehow, I'll look up and see that unnatural grin again, pressed against my window in the darkness. Story 9. I'm still trying to process what happened to me 3 months ago. Even typing this out makes my hands shake a little. I've been lurking on this forum for weeks, reading other people's stories, and I guess it's finally time to share mine. I'm 16, and until recently, I thought our neighborhood was completely safe. The kind of place where nothing bad ever happens, just quiet streets with decent houses and normal families. That's why I never thought twice about walking home from my friend Haley's house that night in October. I'd gone over to Haley's after school to study for our biology test. We were supposed to hang out just the two of us, but around 8 o'clock, some guys from our school showed up uninvited. Tyler, Marcus, and Brandon. Haley has a crush on Marcus, so she was excited, but I was annoyed. I actually wanted to study, not watch Haley flirt while the guys played video games and drank the beers they'd snuck in. By 9:30, I decided to head home. My mom was working late at the hospital. She's a nurse. But I needed to be home before 11 anyway. Haley tried to convince me to stay and even offered to have her mom drive me home later, but I just wanted to leave. The walk to my house only takes about 20 minutes, and I'd done it a million times before. "Text me when you get home," Haley said as I was leaving. "I will," I promised, pulling my jacket tighter around me. It wasn't super cold, but there was this damp chill in the air that got under my skin. The streets were quiet as I started walking. Most houses had their lights on, and I could see families through windows, watching TV or sitting at dinner tables. Normal stuff. I had my earbuds in, listening to music, but kept the volume low enough to hear what was happening around me. My mom always drilled that into me. I was maybe 5 minutes into my walk when I felt something. It's hard to explain, but it was like a weird pressure at the back of my neck, like when someone's watching you. I paused my music and turned around. About 20 feet behind me was a man, just standing there. He looked to be in his 40s, wearing jeans and a dark blue hoodie with the hood pulled up. His hands were stuffed in the pockets of his hoodie. When I turned, he smiled at me. Not a normal smile. It was too wide, too forced, and didn't reach his eyes at all. "How are you?" he called out to me. My stomach instantly knotted up. There was something off about his voice, too eager, like he'd been waiting for me to notice him. "Fine," I said shortly, not wanting to be rude but also not wanting to engage. I turned back around and kept walking, a little faster now. I could hear his footsteps behind me, not running, just walking steadily, keeping pace. I took a left at the next corner, my normal route home. He took the same left. I glanced back, and he was still there. Same distance, still smiling. "Nice night, isn't it?" he called out. I nodded without looking back and picked up my pace. My house was still, at least 15 minutes away. I considered calling my mom, but she was at work and wouldn't be able to come get me. I thought about calling Haley, but what would I even say? Some guy is walking behind me? I didn't want to sound paranoid. After another minute, he spoke again. "Do you like this kind of weather? I prefer it when it's a little cooler." I didn't answer. My heart was starting to race. I took another turn, one that wasn't on my normal route home, but would still get me there. He followed, maintaining that same distance. "You live around here?" he asked, his voice still casual, like we were just two people having a normal conversation. That question made my skin crawl. I pulled out my phone and pretended to text someone, hoping he'd think I was contacting someone about him. I actually opened my messages to Haley but didn't send anything yet. When I looked back again, he had closed the distance between us a little. Maybe 15 feet now instead of 20. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice lower. "You go to Lincoln High, right?" My blood turned to ice. Lincoln was my school. How did he know that? I'd never seen this man before in my life. "Leave me alone," I said, my voice coming out shakier than I wanted it to. He laughed, actually laughed. "I'm just being friendly, making conversation." I started walking even faster, almost jogging now. My fingers were shaking as I texted Haley. "Someone is following me walking home. I'm scared." She responded immediately. "Where are you?" I typed back, "Elm and Oakwood," as I passed the street sign. My phone rang seconds later. It was Haley. "What's happening?" she asked as soon as I answered. "There's this man following me," I whispered, not wanting him to hear me. "He knows I go to Lincoln." "Holy shit. Brandon has his car. We're coming to get you. Stay on main streets with houses." I hung up and shoved my phone in my pocket. When I looked back again, the man had closed the distance even more. Maybe 10 feet now. His smile was gone, replaced with an intense stare that made my stomach turn. "Why are you in such a hurry?" he asked. "I thought we could talk." That's when I panicked. I started running, full sprint. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps getting faster too. I screamed as loud as I could, "Leave me alone!" Lights flicked on in houses as I ran past. I heard a door open and a man's voice called out, "Hey, what's going on out there?" I glanced back and saw the man in the hoodie slowing down, then stopping. A couple had come out of their house and were standing on their porch, looking in our direction. The man in the hoodie turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction. I was gasping for breath, my legs shaking so badly I thought I might collapse. The couple approached me cautiously. "Are you okay?" the woman asked. She looked to be in her 30s, wearing pajama pants and a sweatshirt. "Someone was following me," I managed to say between breaths. "He knew what school I go to." "Come inside," she offered. But just then, headlights swept the street, and a car pulled up. It was Brandon's beat-up Honda Civic. Brandon and Haley jumped out of the car and ran over to me. "What happened? Are you okay?" Haley was nearly in tears. I explained quickly to all of them what had happened. The couple offered to call the police, but I just wanted to get home. I thanked them and got into Brandon's car. The ride to my house was only a few minutes. I kept checking the rearview mirror, terrified I'd see the man following us. Brandon offered to come inside with me since my mom wasn't home yet, and I gratefully accepted. No way was I staying alone. We checked all the doors and windows to make sure they were locked, then sat in the living room watching TV, trying to distract ourselves. I texted my mom to let her know Brandon was over, leaving out why, and that he'd leave before she got home at 2 in the morning. Around midnight we heard it, footsteps on the gravel, path that runs along the side of our house. Brandon muted the TV immediately. We both sat frozen, listening. The footsteps circled around to the back of the house. Then we heard the handle of the back door rattle. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. "Did you lock that door?" Brandon whispered. "Yes," I whispered back, but I wasn't 100% sure. The rattling stopped. For a moment, there was silence. I started to hope whoever it was had given up. Then a voice called up to my bedroom window, which was directly above the back door. "I see you up there." It was him, the same voice from earlier, followed by a quiet laugh that made my skin crawl. Brandon jumped up and yelled, "We're calling the police right now." I already had my phone out, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. When the operator answered, I could barely speak coherently, but managed to explain that someone who had followed me earlier was now trying to break into my house. The police said they'd send someone right away. Brandon and I moved away from the windows, sitting on the floor in the hallway where we couldn't be seen from outside. I called my mom too, telling her everything this time. She said she'd leave work immediately. We heard more footsteps, then silence. About 10 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up, lights flashing. My mom arrived home just after the police, looking pale and terrified. The police searched our yard and the surrounding area, but didn't find anyone. They took my statement and asked for a description of the man. I told them everything I could remember: his approximate age, the hoodie, his voice. They said they'd patrol the area for the rest of the night. After the police left, my mom and I sat on the couch, neither of us able to sleep. Brandon had gone home when my mom arrived. We just sat there, jumping at every little sound, until the sun came up. That was 3 months ago. I've never walked home alone since. My mom drives me everywhere, or makes sure I have a ride. She installed security cameras all around our house and motion sensor lights. I'm afraid to go into our backyard, even during the day. Every time I see a man in a hoodie, my heart stops. The police never found him. They said without more information, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested it might have been a random creep, but I don't believe that. He knew what school I went to. He followed me home. He came back. We're selling our house. My mom made the decision last week. She says she can't stand seeing me so afraid all the time, checking the locks over and over, sleeping with my lights on. We're moving to an apartment building with security in a different part of town. I keep wondering if he's still out there, watching me, waiting. Sometimes I think I see him in crowds or glimpse him on the street. But when I look again, he's gone. Maybe it's just my imagination now. But I know what happened that night was real. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe walking alone again. Story 10. I've been hesitating to write this down for months now. Partly because I don't like thinking about it, and partly because I'm afraid people will think I'm making it up. But I need to get this off my chest and maybe warn others who live in or around Oak Ridge County. This happened last September when I was driving home from my buddy Matt's place out in the sticks. We'd been hanging out, playing video games and having a few beers. I stopped drinking early since I knew I had to drive. It got late, around 1:30 in the morning, when I finally decided I needed to head home. Matt offered to let me crash on his couch, but I had work in the morning and needed my uniform, which was at my apartment. I'd made the drive between our places dozens of times before. It's about 40 minutes total, mostly on empty country roads cutting through farmland. There's hardly any street lights once you get about 10 minutes out from town, just pitch black fields on both sides. That night was particularly dark, no moon, just stars. I remember being exhausted, barely keeping my eyes open. I had my music playing loud and the windows cracked to keep me alert. The road was completely empty. I hadn't seen another car since turning off the main highway. I'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes when something caught my headlights that didn't make sense. At first, I thought my tired brain was playing tricks on me, but as I got closer, I could see it clearly. A white t-shirt standing upright in the middle of my lane, not lying flat on the ground, standing up like someone invisible was wearing it. I slowed down, completely confused. It was just standing there, in the middle of nowhere at almost 2 in the morning. I was too tired to stop and investigate, and something about it felt off, so I just drove around it, watching it in my rearview mirror until it disappeared into the darkness. I remember thinking how weird it was, but I figured maybe some drunk teenagers were messing around. Still, it gave me this uneasy feeling that stuck with me as I kept driving. Not even 5 minutes later, my headlights caught something else in the road ahead. This time, it was a car, just sitting there in my lane with no lights on, no hazards, nothing. It looked like an older sedan, maybe a Chevy or something similar. As I got closer, I could see it had some damage, dents along the side and what looked like scrapes across the roof. I came to a stop about 20 feet behind it and waited, thinking someone would be inside. After about 30 seconds of nothing happening, I honked my horn. No movement, no response. I was getting really nervous at this point. First the t-shirt, now this empty car just sitting there. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. Classic rural dead zone. I didn't want to get out, so I slowly drove around the car, giving it a wide berth. As I passed, I looked inside but couldn't see anyone. It seemed completely abandoned right in the middle of the road. Once I got past it, I sped up a bit, wanting to get home faster. My heart was racing, and I kept checking my rearview mirror to see if the car's lights would suddenly come on and start following me. But the road behind me stayed dark. I'd barely gone another minute down the road, couldn't have been more than half a mile, when I had to slam on my brakes again. This time, there was a man standing in my lane. He was just standing there, facing my car. No vehicle nearby, no explanation for why he'd be out here in the middle of nowhere. He looked to be in his 40s, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. Even from my car, I could see he was disheveled. His clothes were dirty, and he had what looked like bruises or cuts on his hands and forearms. When I stopped, he started walking toward my car with this smile that made my skin crawl. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was too wide, too forced. I kept my doors locked and only rolled my window down about 2 inches when he approached. "Hey there," he said, still smiling. "You haven't seen a car back that way, have you? I could use a ride." His voice was casual, like this was a completely normal situation, like we were at a gas station in broad daylight and not on an empty country road in the middle of the night. "What are you doing out here?" I asked him. He hesitated for just a second before answering. "My car ran out of gas. I've been walking for a while now." That made no sense. The only car I'd seen was the one sitting in the middle of the road, and it didn't look like it had run out of gas. It looked abandoned. As he was talking, I glanced past him and noticed something I hadn't seen before. About 15 feet off the road, barely visible in the darkness, I could make out what looked like the tail lights of a truck or SUV, partially hidden in the bushes. The lights weren't on, but the red reflectors caught the glow from my headlights. In that moment, everything clicked. The t-shirt in the road, the empty car, this guy with injuries on his arms, the hidden vehicle in the bushes. I'm not sure if he noticed me looking at the hidden truck, but something in my face must have changed. I didn't say anything, just started rolling up my window. His entire demeanor transformed instantly. The smile disappeared, replaced by this look of pure rage. He started yelling and pounding on my window. I didn't even process what he was saying. I just floored it, swerving around him. In my rear-view mirror, I saw him running after my car for a few seconds before I left him in the darkness. I drove way over the speed limit all the way to the first town I could find. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely steer. As soon as I got cell reception, I pulled over at a gas station and called 911. The dispatcher tried to keep me calm while I explained what happened. She asked me to wait at the gas station for an officer to take my statement, which I did. 2 county deputies arrived about 20 minutes later. I told them everything: the t-shirt, the car, the man, and the vehicle I'd spotted in the bushes. They took my information and said they'd check it out right away. One of the officers offered to follow me home to make sure I got there safely, which I gratefully accepted. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering if I'd overreacted or imagined things. But deep down, I knew something very wrong had been happening on that road. The next afternoon, one of the deputies called me. What he told me made me physically sick. They'd found the abandoned car exactly where I'd described. When they investigated the area, they discovered the truck in the bushes, and inside was the body of a man who had been beaten and stabbed to death. Based on the state of the body, they believed he had been killed just hours before I drove through. The officer explained that they believed the t-shirt and car had been placed as a trap to make drivers stop. The man I encountered was likely the killer, trying to find another victim after hiding the truck with the first victim inside. They never found the man I saw. By the time more officers arrived to search the area, he was long gone. They found multiple sets of footprints around the scene, suggesting he might not have been working alone. The investigation is still ongoing. I had to look at mugshots, talk to detectives, the whole thing. They told me I need to be prepared to testify if they ever catch the guy, but so far, nothing. Sometimes I worry that he saw my license plate and might come looking for me, but the police assured me that's unlikely. I can't help but think about what would have happened if I'd gotten out of my car to check on that abandoned vehicle, or if I'd agreed to give that man a ride. I would have disappeared that night, and maybe no one would have found that poor guy in the truck for days or weeks. I've since moved to a different apartment closer to town, and I've completely changed my driving habits. I don't drive on rural roads at night anymore. No matter how much longer it takes, I stick to main highways with plenty of traffic. The thing that haunts me most is how calculated it all was. The t-shirt to make you curious, the car to make you stop, and then the man appearing just as you're already on edge. It was a carefully laid trap that I just happened to drive into and somehow drive out of. I still have nightmares about that smile, that unnatural, predatory smile that disappeared the moment he realized I wasn't going to be his next victim. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear someone knocking on my window. I've never driven down that road again, day or night. I don't think I ever will. Story 11. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened in El Yunque. It's been nearly 40 years, but some nights I wake up in a cold sweat, that woman's scream still echoing in my head. I've never shared this publicly before, but I need to get it off my chest. This happened during spring break of '84 when I was a junior at Wharton. I'd been dating Maria Munez for about 8 months. She was from San Juan, and I'd flown down to Puerto Rico to meet her family. For the most part, the trip was amazing. Her parents were welcoming, the food was incredible, and the beaches were exactly what a stressed-out college kid needed. On our 5th day there, Maria suggested we visit El Yunque National Forest. She'd grown up going there and kept talking about this one trail that had these amazing waterfalls where you could swim. When we arrived at the park entrance, though, we discovered the trail was closed. Something about maintenance or safety concerns. I don't really remember the exact reason. I was disappointed, but figured we'd just take one of the other trails. Maria had other ideas. She kept talking about how she'd promised me the best swimming hole in Puerto Rico and how the closure was probably just bureaucratic nonsense. Looking back, I should have been firmer, but when you're 21 and your girlfriend is giving you that look, well, common sense tends to take a back seat. "We can just duck under the barrier," she whispered as we walked past the ranger station. "Nobody ever patrols that section in the afternoon." I hesitated for a moment, but Maria was already walking toward the trailhead with this mischievous smile. We waited until no one was looking, then quickly slipped past the wooden barrier blocking the trail entrance. The forest was absolutely breathtaking. Massive trees with roots that sprawled across the path, vines hanging from branches, and the constant ambient noise of birds and insects. The humidity was intense. Within minutes, my t-shirt was sticking to my back. The trail itself was reasonably maintained, though you could tell it hadn't seen foot traffic in a while. There were a few areas where branches had fallen across the path, and we had to climb over them. "See, this is perfect," Maria said, pulling a flask of rum from her backpack. "We have the whole place to ourselves." And she was right. It was peaceful in a way I rarely experienced. No other hikers, no noise, but the natural sounds of the rainforest. We passed the flask back and forth as we hiked, taking our time, stopping to look at interesting plants or particularly beautiful views. Maria knew a surprising amount about the local flora and would occasionally point out plants and tell me what they were used for traditionally. We'd been hiking for maybe 45 minutes when Maria suddenly stopped dead in her tracks a few steps ahead of me. The sound that came out of her throat wasn't quite a scream, more like a horrified gasp. "What?" I asked, moving up beside her. That's when I saw it, a mongoose lying in the middle of the trail, its head completely separated from its body. The animal couldn't have been dead for more than an hour or two. There wasn't much blood, just a small dark pool that had seeped into the dirt. I crouched down for a closer look while Maria stood back, visibly disturbed. The cut was unnervingly clean, a single slice that had completely severed the head. This wasn't done by another animal. This was a knife wound. "Someone killed it," I said, stating the obvious. "Let's keep going," Maria replied, her voice strained. "I don't want to stay here." I stood up, wiping my hands on my shorts even though I hadn't touched anything. The realization that someone else was in these woods, someone who had very recently killed and decapitated an animal, sent a chill through me despite the heat. We continued hiking, but the carefree mood had evaporated. We stopped passing the flask. Maria wasn't pointing out plants anymore. The sounds of the forest that had seemed so peaceful earlier now felt ominous, like they could be masking footsteps following behind us. After about another mile, Maria stopped again. "I think we should go back," she said, hugging herself despite the heat. "I don't feel good about this anymore." I nodded immediately, relieved she'd suggested it. "Yeah, let's head back." We turned around and started retracing our steps. The hike back was tense. We weren't talking much, both scanning the trees around us as we walked. When we approached the area where we'd seen the mongoose, I found myself hoping it wouldn't be there anymore. Not because I was afraid of seeing a dead animal again, but because I was afraid of what it would mean if it was gone. When we reached the spot, the mongoose's body was indeed gone. But what replaced it was so much worse. Hanging from a low branch of a tree beside the trail was the mongoose, strung up with some kind of twine, its paws tied together. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that its fur was now slick with some kind of green fluid that dripped slowly onto the ground below, forming a small puddle. The head was still missing. Maria screamed, not a gasp this time, but a full-throated scream of terror. I grabbed her hand and we started running. I don't know what made me look back, some primal instinct maybe, but when I did, I could have sworn I saw movement in the trees beyond where the mongoose was hanging. We ran for what felt like forever, stumbling on roots, branches slapping against our faces and arms. The backpack bounced painfully against my spine with each step. My lungs were burning from the humid air, but the adrenaline kept us moving. That's when we heard it. A woman's scream from somewhere behind us. It wasn't Maria. It wasn't even close to us. But it echoed through the trees, high-pitched and blood-curdling. It didn't sound like fear. It sounded like rage. Maria froze for a half-second, then ran even faster, pulling me along. I kept looking back, expecting to see someone chasing us, but the trail behind us remained empty. Just trees and vines and that oppressive green twilight filtered through the canopy. The screaming stopped as abruptly as it had started, which was somehow worse than if it had continued. The forest fell eerily silent. Even the birds and insects seemed to have gone quiet. We didn't stop running until we reached the barrier at the trailhead. We practically vaulted over it, not caring who saw us. A park employee was standing nearby and immediately started walking toward us, obviously preparing to scold us for being on a closed trail. "Hey, you can't go back there," he began, but stopped mid-sentence when he got a good look at us, sweaty, scratched up, and with Maria in tears. "What happened?" he asked. His tone completely changed. I was bent over, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. Maria was shaking too hard to speak. The employee, his name tag said Carlos, led us to a bench and got us some water. Once I could breathe again, I told him everything. The mongoose, the green fluid, the scream. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "Wait here," he said once I finished, and walked quickly toward the ranger station. He returned with 2 rangers who asked us to repeat the story. They took notes and asked for our contact information. They were professional, but I could tell they were disturbed. One of them kept asking if we'd seen anyone else on the trail, or if we'd noticed any markings or symbols near the mongoose. We hadn't. They escorted us to our car and advised us not to return to El Yunque for the remainder of our trip. They assured us they would investigate, but I never heard anything further. I called the ranger station a week later before flying home, but whoever answered the phone claimed no knowledge of the incident. The rest of the trip was strained. Maria was jumpy and withdrawn. We argued about small things. When I returned to school, our phone calls became less frequent, and by summer, we'd broken up. I sometimes wonder if what happened in El Yunque was the real reason, though neither of us ever directly blamed it. I've researched El Yunque in the years since, looking for similar stories or explanations. The forest has its share of legends, tales of the Taino spirits, the chupacabra, and local witchcraft practices. Nothing quite matches what we experienced, though. I still don't know what we encountered that day. Was it some kind of ritual, a warning, just a disturbed person living in or frequenting the forest? And whose scream did we hear? I never saw another person on that trail, yet I'm absolutely certain we weren't alone. Sometimes I think about reaching out to Maria to see if she's found any answers or peace with what happened, but I never do. Some memories are better left undisturbed, like that trail in El Yunque should have been. I still have nightmares about that green fluid dripping from the mongoose's fur, and in the dreams, I always know that if I wait long enough, I'll see who put it there. But I always wake up before I do, drenched in sweat, with that woman's scream echoing in my ears, a scream that still haunts me all these years later. Story 12. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but I need to get it off my chest because I still have nightmares about what happened. It's been 3 months, and I'm finally able to talk about it without breaking down. My best friend Lena and I were excited for spring break of our junior year. We're not exactly rolling in money, hello, student loans. So instead of following the crowd to places like Cancun or Miami, we decided on Charleston. It seemed perfect, historic, beautiful, and most importantly, affordable. We found this cute little Airbnb just a short walk from the historic district, split the cost, and honestly felt pretty clever for avoiding the typical spring break chaos. The first 2 days were amazing. We visited the French Quarter, took one of those horse-drawn carriage tours, and stuffed ourselves with incredible southern food. The weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with a nice breeze. We were taking tons of pictures, sending them to our families, posting on social media. Normal vacation stuff, you know. On the 3rd day, while we were having breakfast at this little cafe near the waterfront, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Just a simple, "Hey." I figured it was someone who had the wrong number, so I ignored it. About an hour later, another text came through. "Hello?" Again, I didn't respond. We spent the day shopping and walking around, and I completely forgot about it. That evening, we decided to check out this rooftop bar that the Airbnb host had recommended. We got dressed up. I wore this bright red jacket I'd just bought the day before and headed out around 7. The place was amazing, with these string lights and an incredible view of the city. We ordered drinks and were just chatting about which tours we wanted to do the next day when my phone buzzed. The same unknown number. "Look outside." My stomach immediately dropped. I showed Lena and she tried to play it off like maybe it was just a coincidence, someone texting the wrong person. But then another text came through. "Anna, I can see you." I felt like I couldn't breathe. How did they know my name? I looked around frantically, but the bar was crowded, and I couldn't tell if anyone was watching us. I was about to tell Lena we should leave when another text came. "That's a nice red jacket." My hands started shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone. There was no way this was a mistake or a coincidence anymore. Someone was watching me, right at that moment. I showed Lena, and her face went white. We immediately asked for our check, paid, and practically ran out of there, constantly looking over our shoulders. Instead of walking back like we'd planned, we called an Uber and asked him to drop us right at the door of our Airbnb. The whole ride, I kept checking behind us to see if anyone was following. I couldn't stop thinking about how this person had my phone number and knew my name. How long had they been watching us? As soon as we got inside, we locked every door and window in the place. Lena even pushed a chair against the front door. We turned off most of the lights and sat in the living room, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That I got some creepy texts? I didn't think they'd take it seriously. Around 10, we realized we hadn't eaten dinner, and we were both starving. But there was no way either of us was going to leave the Airbnb. Lena suggested Uber Eats, and we carefully selected the Leave at Door option. We ordered from this pizza place about 20 minutes away, and the app said our food would arrive in about 40 minutes. Those 40 minutes felt like forever. We kept the TV on for background noise, but neither of us was watching it. I kept checking my phone, half expecting more texts, but there weren't any. Part of me hoped that whoever it was had just been playing a cruel joke and was now done. When the app notified us that our food had been picked up, we felt relieved that it would be there soon. About 30 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Lena and I looked at each other in confusion. We'd specifically selected leave at door. There shouldn't be any knocking. "Hello? Uber Eats delivery," a male voice called from outside. I whispered to Lena, "Why is he knocking? It's supposed to be contactless." Lena peeked through the peephole and described what she saw. A guy in a dark hoodie holding our food bag, his face partially obscured. "Maybe he didn't see the instructions," she whispered back. I slowly approached the door but didn't open it. "Hi, could you please just leave it at the door? We selected contactless delivery." There was a pause before he responded. "I need a signature for this order." That made no sense. We'd ordered from Uber Eats dozens of times, and none had ever required a signature. I felt that same sinking feeling in my stomach. "That's not right," I called through the door. "Uber Eats doesn't need signatures. Please just leave the food." His voice changed slightly, becoming firmer. "There's an alcohol item, so I need to verify ID and get a signature." Now, I was certain something was wrong. We hadn't ordered any alcohol, just pizza and wings. "We didn't order any alcohol," I said, my voice shaking. "Please, just leave the food." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Anna, I need you to open the door." My blood ran cold. How did he know my name? I hadn't used it in the Uber Eats order. Lena had placed it under her account. "Lena, call 911, I whispered urgently. "Right now." As Lena grabbed her phone and moved to the bedroom to make the call, the knocking turned into pounding. "Anna, open the door. I know you're in there." His voice had completely changed, no longer pretending to be professional. It was angry, threatening. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The banging continued, getting louder and more frantic. I could hear him jiggling the doorknob, trying to get in. "I've been watching you, Anna. I know all about you. Open the door." I was frozen with fear, standing in the middle of the living room, unable to move. I could hear Lena in the bedroom talking frantically to the 911 operator. The banging on the door was so violent, I was afraid it would break. Then, suddenly, I heard sirens in the distance. The man at the door must have heard them too, because the banging stopped abruptly. There was silence for a moment, and then the sound of footsteps running away. Less than 2 minutes later, the police were at our door. Lena had told them everything. The texts, the delivery man knowing my name, the violent attempts to get inside. They immediately began searching the area and told us to stay inside with the doors locked. About 20 minutes later, an officer came back to tell us they'd caught a man running several blocks away. When they searched him, they found my phone number written on a piece of paper, along with our Airbnb address and other information about us. The most terrifying part came when they told us who he was. He worked at the cafe we'd visited on our first day in Charleston. Remember how I mentioned we'd been taking pictures and posting on social media? Well, this cafe had been running a giveaway, and we'd filled out these little forms with our names, phone numbers, and emails to enter. The man had seen us, taken my information from the form, and had been following us ever since. The police explained that he'd been tracking our social media posts to figure out where we were going. That's how he knew about the red jacket and could find us at the rooftop bar. When we ordered food that night, he had somehow intercepted the actual delivery driver and taken our food, using it as an excuse to try to get inside. When the police searched his car, they found rope, duct tape, and a knife. They also discovered he had a criminal record for assault and stalking. I couldn't stop shaking when they told us this. All I could think about was what would have happened if we'd opened that door. or if Lena hadn't called 911 when she did. The police officer told us it was lucky we had been cautious and hadn't let him in. We left Charleston the next morning. I couldn't bear to stay another minute in that city. The police assured us he was in custody and facing serious charges, but I still couldn't feel safe there. It's been 3 months and I'm still dealing with the aftermath. I've deleted most of my social media accounts. I'm paranoid about giving out my personal information. I can't sleep without checking all the doors and windows multiple times, and I get a panic attack whenever someone knocks unexpectedly at my door. I keep thinking about how easily this could have gone differently. If we'd been a little less careful, if we'd opened that door, I don't even want to think about what might have happened. I guess the reason I'm finally sharing this is as a warning. Be careful with your personal information. Be wary of posting your location in real time. And always, always trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I still have no idea why he chose me. Was it just random? Did I smile at him at the cafe without realizing it? Did something about me specifically catch his attention? I'll never know, and that's almost as terrifying as what actually happened, the randomness of it. The fact that a normal, fun vacation could turn into this nightmare in an instant. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear someone knocking at my door, calling my name, and I wonder if I'll ever feel completely safe again. Story 13. I've never told anyone outside my family about this, mainly because I don't think anyone would believe me. Even now, 20 years later, I get chills thinking about it. So back in 2004, when I was 12, my dad bought this weekend getaway house in the mountains of upstate New York. We lived in New Jersey at the time, and Dad thought it would be good to have a place where we could escape the suburbs and reconnect with nature. His words, not mine. The house itself was pretty nice, nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom cabin with a big deck overlooking the woods. My bedroom had this window that faced the back of our property. About 100 yards into the trees stood this decrepit old house. I mean seriously falling apart. Half the roof had already caved in, and the walls looked like they might collapse any day. You could easily see it from my window once the leaves fell in autumn. The weird thing was, despite how decayed the outside looked, you could see that the inside still had furniture. There were these old dusty sheets covering what I assumed were couches and tables. It was like whoever lived there just up and left everything behind. There was also this ancient Ford Fairlane in the driveway, practically swallowed by weeds and rust. My dad figured the place had been abandoned since the 70s at least, based on the car model. When we first moved in, Dad warned me to stay away from the old house. "That place is a death trap," he said. "One strong wind and the whole thing could come down." So naturally, I was dying to check it out, but I was too scared to go alone. My opportunity came that summer when my cousin Jake visited for the weekend. Jake was 13 and always up for anything that might get us in trouble. The first day he was there, we were bored out of our minds. My PlayStation was back home, cell reception was garbage, and there was literally nothing to do except wander around outside. "Let's go check out that creepy house you told me about," Jake suggested after we'd exhausted every other possibility for entertainment. I hesitated. My dad said to stay away from it. Jake rolled his eyes. "We don't have to go inside, dummy. We can just look through the windows." That seemed reasonable enough. Plus, I had gotten these new paintball guns for my birthday that we'd been dying to try out. So we grabbed our gear and headed into the woods. It took us about 10 minutes to reach the old house. Up close, it was even creepier than it looked from my window. The paint had peeled off so long ago that the wood was this sickly gray color. The porch steps were completely rotted through, and there were these weird scratches all over the front door. The windows were absolutely filthy, covered in decades of dirt and massive cobwebs that hung like curtains. We stood there for a while, too nervous to get any closer. Then Jake nudged me. "Bet you can't hit that window from here," he said, pointing to a large one on the second floor. I raised my paintball gun, took aim, and fired. The ball hit the glass with a satisfying crack and left a bright splatter of neon green. The window didn't break, though. "Weak," Jake said. "Watch this." He aimed at a downstairs window and fired 3 quick shots. The glass shattered with a crash that seemed way too loud in the quiet woods. Shards fell onto the porch below, and we both froze, half expecting someone to yell at us. But nothing happened, just silence. "Holy crap, you broke it," I whispered. Jake grinned. "Your turn." Something about seeing that first window break made me forget all about my dad's warnings. Suddenly, we were on a mission to break every single window in the place. We ran around the perimeter of the house, shooting paintballs at each window we saw. Most of them shattered immediately. The glass was probably already weak from age. Within 15 minutes, we'd broken every accessible window, leaving the frames empty except for a few jagged pieces still clinging to the rotted wood. The house looked even more destroyed now, with bright splatters of paint everywhere and glass littering the ground. I felt a twinge of guilt, but it was overwhelmed by the thrill of destruction. We high-fived and headed back to my house, swearing each other to secrecy. "If your dad asks," Jake said, "we were just shooting at trees." I nodded, already rehearsing my lie. Jake went home the next day, and I didn't think much about the old house for a couple of weeks. Why would I? We'd had our fun, and there was nothing left to destroy. About 2 weekends later, Jake came to visit again. We were sitting in my room on Friday night when he suggested we go back to the abandoned house the next morning. "Why?" I asked. "We already shot out all the windows." "I don't know. Maybe we can find a way inside this time." I wasn't thrilled about the idea of actually entering the house, but I agreed anyway. The next morning, we grabbed our paintball guns again, mostly as an excuse if my parents asked where we were going, and headed back into the woods. As we approached the clearing where the house stood, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The house was still there, still decrepit, still abandoned, but something was different. Then it hit me. The windows, all of them, every single one we had shattered 2 weeks before, were intact. They were still dusty and covered with those same thick cobwebs, but there was no broken glass, no paint splatters, nothing to indicate we'd ever been there. I stopped in my tracks. "Jake, look!" He saw it too. We stood there staring at the house like we were seeing a ghost. "Maybe we broke different windows," he suggested, but his voice was uncertain. "We broke all the windows," I said. "I remember." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Well, someone must have replaced them." Who would replace windows in an abandoned house? And how did they get the same dirt and cobwebs back on them? We approached cautiously, examining the windows up close. They were definitely intact. Not new glass in old frames, the original windows completely undamaged. The dirt patterns were identical to what I remembered from our first visit. Even the cobwebs were exactly the same. "This is impossible," I whispered. Jake tried to act tough. "Whatever, let's break them again." So we did. We shot out every window just like before, leaving a mess of broken glass and paint. And just like before, we ran back to my house afterward. But this time we weren't celebrating. We were freaked out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring out my window toward the dark shape of the old house in the distance. I half expected to see lights flickering inside or some shadowy figure watching me from one of the now broken windows. But there was nothing, just darkness. Jake left the next day, and I avoided talking about the house. I didn't want to think about it. For the next several months, I deliberately stayed away from that part of the woods. Whenever we came up for weekends, I found reasons to stay near our house or head in the opposite direction for hikes with my dad. It wasn't until the following spring, almost 6 months later, that I finally got the courage to go back. Jake was visiting again, and after I told him I hadn't been back since our last trip, he insisted we check it out. "I bet the windows are fixed again," he said with a nervous laugh. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of," I admitted. We took a different route through the woods this time, approaching from the side rather than head on. I don't know why. Maybe we thought we could somehow catch the house by surprise. It sounds stupid now, but we were kids and we were scared. As we got closer, I realized something was wrong. The silhouette of the house wasn't where it should be. When we finally reached the clearing, we stopped and stared in disbelief. The house was gone. Not just empty or collapsed, completely gone. In its place was nothing but a pile of overgrown rubble. Bits of wood and stone peeked out from beneath weeds and saplings that had already started reclaiming the land. The only thing still recognizable was the old Ford Fairlane, now even more consumed by vegetation. It looked like the house had been deliberately demolished and bulldozed. But who would do that? The property had been abandoned for decades, and my dad never mentioned anything about development in the area. We spent about an hour poking through the rubble, looking for, I don't know what, evidence, some explanation. We found nothing but rotted wood, rusted nails, and broken glass. "Maybe your dad knows something about it," Jake suggested as we headed back. But when I asked my dad later, he just shrugged. That old place was a hazard. County probably finally got around to condemning it and tearing it down. I didn't tell him about the windows. Over the years, I've tried to come up with logical explanations. Maybe someone was secretly living there and repaired the windows. But why preserve the dirt and cobwebs? Maybe we imagined breaking them the first time. But both of us remembered it clearly. Maybe the house was being used for something illegal, and whoever was using it didn't want attention. Nothing makes sense. Among all the strange things I've experienced in those woods, and believe me, there were others, this is the one that still bothers me the most because I can't explain it. We sold the weekend house when I was 16, and I haven't been back to the area since. Sometimes I think about driving up there just to see if anything remains of that pile of rubble. But honestly, I'm afraid of what I might find instead. Story 14. I still get chills thinking about what happened back in 2008 when I was 15. It's been years, but I swear I can still hear Abby barking in my head whenever I'm home alone at night. My parents had planned this overnight trip to a casino about 2 hours away. They'd been looking forward to it for weeks. Mom had even bought a new dress for the occasion. They left around 6 in the evening, and I was actually pretty excited to have the house to myself. Just me and our black lab, Abby. She was about 7 years old then, the sweetest dog you could imagine. But she was also super protective of me. It was a Friday night, so naturally I was doing what any 15-year-old kid would do with the house to himself. Staying up late, messaging friends on AIM and watching random YouTube videos. This was back when YouTube was still pretty new, and I was going down some rabbit hole of skateboarding fails. I remember I had a bag of Doritos and a Mountain Dew beside me, living the teenage dream, right? Everything was completely normal until about 11 o'clock. I was in the middle of typing a message when Abby suddenly started barking like crazy. Not her normal, someone's walking past the house bark, but this frantic, alarmed sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. She was in the front room, facing the door, and her whole body was rigid. I paused my video and called out, "Abby, what is it, girl?" Thinking maybe my parents had come home early for some reason. When she didn't stop, I got up to check. Our front room had these big windows facing the driveway, and I fully expected to see my dad's Chevy pulling in. But there was nothing there except our old oak tree casting weird shadows from the streetlight, just our empty driveway and the neighbor's house across the street with all their lights off. Abby was still going nuts, running between the front door and the side door that led to our carport. I tried to calm her down, but she wasn't having it. She kept staring at the doors and growling low in her throat, which was really unlike her. That's when I heard it. This light tapping sound at one of the front windows. Tap, 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 like someone running their fingernail across the glass. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then stopped. "Hello?" I called out, feeling stupid immediately afterward. Like, if someone was trying to break in, they'd just be like, "Hi there, don't mind me." I stood completely still, listening. Our house was older, built in the 70s, and it made noises all the time, but this didn't sound like the usual creaks and pops. This sounded deliberate. A few minutes passed, and I was starting to think I'd imagined it when I heard the same tapping sound, but this time at the side door. The one nobody ever used except to take out the trash. Tap, tap, tap. My chest got tight. Abby darted to that door, barking her head off. I followed her, but stayed back a few feet. The side door had a small window in it, but it was too dark to see anything outside. "Who's there?" I called, trying to make my voice sound deeper than it was. No answer. I'm not proud of this, but I was too scared to actually go look out that side door. Window. Instead, I backed away and decided to check all the locks. Front door, locked. Side door, locked. Basement door. The basement door handle started rattling. Here's the thing about our basement door. It wasn't obvious. It was this narrow door at the end of the hallway that looked like it might be a closet. If you didn't know our house, you wouldn't know it led to the basement. It didn't even have a proper doorknob, just this old-fashioned metal handle that you had to push down to open, and someone was trying to open it. I froze completely. Abby rushed to the basement door and started barking more aggressively than I've ever heard her bark in her entire life. She was practically throwing herself against the door. The rattling got more intense, like whoever was down there was getting frustrated. Then I heard what sounded like someone bumping against the door, followed by a thud. Then silence. Complete silence. I stood there not breathing for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Abby had stopped barking and was sniffing frantically at the space under the door, her hackles still raised. That's when the fight or flight kicked in. My whole body was shaking, but my brain suddenly got super clear. I called Abby upstairs, grabbed the cordless house phone. I had a cell phone, but it was charging in my room and I wasn't about to go back there alone, and went into my parents' bedroom. My dad kept a gun in their closet. I'd never touched it before. He'd shown it to me once and made it very clear I was never to mess with it. But this seemed like exactly the kind of situation he'd bought it for. I locked my parents' bedroom door behind me, then locked myself in their walk-in closet with Abby. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. I was literally one digit away from calling 911 when I heard the front door open. My heart stopped. Abby's ears perked up, but she didn't bark. Instead, she started wagging her tail slightly, which confused the hell out of me. Then I heard my mom's voice call out, "Tyler, are you still up, honey?" The relief that flooded through me was so intense, I nearly threw up. I unlocked the closet and my parents' bedroom door and rushed downstairs with Abby at my heels. My parents were standing in the entryway looking confused. My dad had his casino chips in hand, and my mom was taking off her earrings. "What are you doing home?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I thought you were staying overnight." "The casino was packed, and your father was having terrible luck," my mom explained, giving him a look. "We decided to cut our losses and come home. Were you just upstairs with the gun?" I broke down and told them everything, the tapping, the side door, and especially the basement door handle rattling. My dad immediately went into protection mode, grabbed his gun, and did a complete sweep of the house and yard, while my mom stayed with me. He found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints outside, nothing unusual in the basement. The basement door was still locked from our side, which made no sense if someone had been trying to come up. Dad even checked the outside basement entrance, which had a heavy metal door that hadn't been opened in years and was secured with a rusty padlock. We chalked it up to my imagination and the house settling, though I knew what I'd heard. I barely slept that night, even with my parents home and Abby sleeping right next to my bed. The next afternoon, around 3, there was a knock at the door. Abby started barking again, but not in the same frantic way as the night before. When my dad opened the door, there stood my Uncle Pete. I should tell you about Uncle Pete. He's my dad's older brother, and there's always been something off about him. He's the kind of guy who tells inappropriate jokes at family gatherings and stands too close when he talks to you. He's never been diagnosed with anything as far as I know, but my mom always said he was a narcissist. He lived about 20 minutes away, but would show up randomly without calling first. "Pete, what brings you by?" my dad asked, not bothering to hide his annoyance. Uncle Pete had this weird smile on his face. "Just wanted to drop by and say thanks to Tyler for helping Kate with her softball." Kate was my cousin, his daughter. I had been helping her practice pitching a few times that month. He pulled out a thank you card and a gift certificate to Dairy Queen from his jacket pocket. "I actually stopped by last night to drop this off, but nobody answered the door." My blood ran cold. I looked at my dad, who had gone still. "What time was this?" Dad asked casually, but I could see his jaw tighten. "Oh, around 11 or so. I knocked, but the TV was pretty loud, so I figured the kid couldn't hear me. Tried the side door too, thought maybe you'd hear me there." My dad glanced at me, then back at Uncle Pete. "And then what did you do?" Uncle Pete shrugged. "Well, I thought maybe he was downstairs playing those video games with the headphones on. You know how kids get. So I went around to check if the basement light was on, but it was dark. Tried the door just in case, but it was locked up tight." He laughed like this was all perfectly normal behavior. I felt sick. It had been Uncle Pete all along. He'd been trying every entrance to our house while I was alone, even the hidden basement door that only family would know about. My dad thanked him stiffly for the gift card, made up some excuse about having plans, and practically pushed him out the door. As soon as it closed, my dad turned to me, his face pale. "You were right," he said quietly. "Someone was trying to get in." Here's the thing that still haunts me. Why would Uncle Pete be so desperate to get into our house when he thought I was alone? Why try every single entrance, including the basement? Why not just call out that it was him? And why did he seem so disappointed when he saw my parents were home? We never left me alone when Uncle Pete was in town after that. My dad had a talk with him that I wasn't privy to, and Uncle Pete's visits became less frequent. He acted offended that we'd found his behavior creepy, insisting he was just trying to be nice by bringing me a gift card. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if he had managed to get inside that night. Maybe it was innocent, but the memory of Abby's frantic barking and that basement handle rattling still keeps me up sometimes. There was something about the determined way he tried every entrance, like he absolutely had to get in, that I just can't shake. Some family members are better kept at a distance, and some doors are better left locked. Story 15. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that weekend 3 months ago. I've been trying to make sense of it ever since, but honestly, I'm not sure I ever will. For context, I'm Lucas, 22 years old, living in Ridgewood, one of those towns where nothing ever happens. Like, the biggest news is usually when someone's dog gets loose or when the high school football team actually wins a game. I moved into my parents' basement after college to save money. Student loans are killer, you know. The setup was perfect. I had my own entrance, a decent-sized space with a mini kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and I had some privacy while still saving on rent. My parents decided to take a weekend trip to visit my aunt in Vermont that Friday. They left around noon, and I immediately did what any 22-year-old would do with an empty house. I invited my buddies over. Anthony and Jay showed up around 7 that evening with a case of beer and some chips. We ordered pizza, cranked up the music, and settled in to watch the hockey game. The Bruins were playing, and we're massive fans. It was just a normal guy's night. Nothing crazy. We were pretty buzzed by the end of the game. The Bruins won, so we kept celebrating, drinking more beers than we probably should have. Around 2 in the morning, we were all wasted. Anthony was slurring his words, and Jay kept laughing at absolutely nothing. That's when I suggested they crash at my place instead of driving home. You guys can take the sectional in the basement. It's big enough for both of you. They didn't argue. The couch was huge, an L-shaped thing my parents bought years ago. I gave them some blankets and pillows, made sure they were comfortable, and then stumbled to my bedroom. I remember closing the door and falling face first onto my bed without even changing. That's how drunk I was. I must have passed out immediately because the next thing I remember is waking up disoriented. The digital clock on my nightstand showed 3:45. Something had woken me, but I wasn't sure what. Then I heard it. Footsteps upstairs. Not heavy stomping, but definite movement. Someone walking across the hardwood floors in the living room above. My first thought was that Anthony or Jay had gone upstairs looking for water or something. I was annoyed but too tired to get up. I figured they'd find their way back downstairs eventually. But then something happened that made my entire body go cold. I heard the handle of my bedroom door turning. Someone was trying to get in. Thank God I'd locked it. It's just a habit I have. I always lock my bedroom door, even when I'm home alone. The handle turned a few more times, and then it stopped. I held my breath, listening. Part of me wanted to call out, to ask if it was Anthony or Jay, but something held me back. Maybe it was the alcohol making me paranoid, but something felt off. I decided to pretend I was asleep. I don't know why. It just seemed like the safest option at the time. Eventually, I heard footsteps walking away, and I must have fallen back asleep because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I woke up with a pounding headache around 10. The events of the night before were fuzzy, but I remembered someone trying my door. I shuffled out to the main area of the basement where Anthony and Jay were still passed out on the sectional. I made coffee and the smell eventually woke them up. "Dude, I feel like death," Anthony groaned, sitting up and rubbing his face. "Same," Jay mumbled from the other end of the couch. We sat around drinking coffee, trying to recover. That's when I decided to ask, "Hey, did either of you try to come into my room last night?" They both looked confused. "What?" "No," Anthony said. "I didn't even get up once I passed out," Jay added. "Why?" I shrugged, trying to play it off. "Nothing. I just thought I heard someone at my door in the middle of the night." "Probably just dreamed it," Anthony suggested. "You were pretty wasted." I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. I knew what I'd heard, but I let it go. What else could I do? We spent the day watching TV and nursing our hangovers. Anthony and Jay left around 4 that afternoon, and I had the place to myself. My parents weren't coming back until Sunday evening, so I decided to go out. I texted a few friends and ended up meeting them at a bar downtown. I didn't drink much, still feeling rough from the night before, and left around 11. When I got home, the house was dark and quiet, just as I'd left it. I went straight to the basement, locked the door behind me, and got ready for bed. I was exhausted and fell asleep almost immediately. I'm not sure what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark. At first, I wasn't sure what had disturbed me. Then I heard it, creaking floorboards from upstairs, the same sound I'd heard the night before. But this time, I was completely sober, and my friends were gone. I froze, listening intently. The creaking continued, moving from what sounded like the living room to the kitchen. Then came a tapping sound, like someone lightly drumming, their fingers on a counter or table. My heart was racing. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, hand trembling. The house should be empty. My parents weren't due back until tomorrow evening. There shouldn't be anyone upstairs. The creaking started again, this time moving toward the stairs that led to the basement. I heard the basement door open, that distinct squeak it always makes. Then footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate. I was paralyzed with fear, clutching my phone, debating whether to call the police. What if I was just being paranoid? What if it was somehow my parents, home early, but deep down, I knew it wasn't them. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Then silence. I held my breath, straining to hear. The next sound nearly made me jump out of my skin, light knocking on my bedroom door. Not urgent or aggressive, just gentle tapping. Tap, tap, tap. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. No response, just more tapping. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that someone was in the house who shouldn't be. I quickly texted my parents. "Is anyone supposed to be at the house?" I texted Jay and Anthony too. "Did either of you come back to my place?" While waiting for responses, the tapping continued, now accompanied by the sound of the doorknob turning. Again, my locked door prevented whoever it was from entering. But the knob kept turning, back and forth, back and forth. No responses came through on my phone. I called 911. "911, what's your emergency?" the dispatcher answered. I whispered as quietly as I could, "There's someone in my house. I think it's an intruder." I gave them my address and explained the situation. They told me to stay on the line and that officers were on their way. The whole time I could hear the person outside my door. They'd stopped trying the handle but hadn't left. I could hear breathing, soft but definitely there. I slid off my bed as quietly as possible and crouched behind my dresser, grabbing a baseball bat I keep under my bed. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The dispatcher kept asking if I was okay, and I just whispered back, "Yes," as softly as I could. It felt like hours, but it was probably only about 8 minutes before I heard sirens in the distance. The person outside my door must have heard them too, because suddenly there were hurried footsteps moving away. The police arrived, and I heard them entering the house, announcing themselves. Only then did I finally unlock my bedroom door, still clutching the bat. 2 officers were in the basement, guns drawn. When they saw me, they lowered their weapons. "Are you Lucas Mitchell?" one asked. I nodded, unable to speak. "We're going to clear the house, sir. Stay here." I sat on the edge of my bed, still holding the bat, listening as the officers moved through the house above me. More police had arrived. I could hear the radio chatter. Then came shouting from upstairs. "Police! Don't move! Show me your hands!" There was a commotion, and I heard heavy footsteps, multiple people moving around. A few minutes later, one of the officers came back downstairs. "We found someone, sir. He was hiding under a bed in one of the upstairs bedrooms." I felt sick. Under a bed? My parents' bed? The officer nodded. "We're taking him out now. Would you like to come upstairs?" I followed the officer up the stairs on shaky legs. In the living room, 2 other officers were restraining a man I'd never seen before. He was dirty, with long, tangled hair and a scraggly beard. His clothes were filthy and worn. He looked like he'd been living rough for a long time, but it was his eyes that got to me. When he saw me, his expression changed. It was pure hatred. He stared at me with such intensity that I had to look away. It was like he knew me, like I'd done something terrible to him, but I'd never seen him before in my life. "Do you know this man?" one of the officers asked. I shook my head. "No, never seen him before." They took him outside to a patrol car. An officer stayed with me to take my statement. I told him everything, about hearing someone the night before when my friends were over, about waking up tonight to the sounds, about the knocking on my door. "Did you notice anything missing? Any signs of forced entry?" the officer asked. That's when it hit me. I hadn't checked if anything was stolen, and I had no idea how the man had gotten in. We did a quick check of the house, but nothing seemed to be missing. All the doors and windows were locked except the small window in the laundry room at the back of the house was unlatched. It wasn't broken, just unlocked. My mom sometimes opens it when doing laundry to let the humid air out. She must have forgotten to lock it before they left, but something about that didn't sit right with me. If the guy had just broken in that night, why did I hear someone the night before too? Unless... Is it possible he's been in the house longer than just tonight? I asked the officer. He looked grim. It's possible. There are cases where individuals like this find a place to hide and stay there for days, sometimes weeks, coming out only when the occupants are asleep or away. The thought made me want to throw up. Had this stranger been living in our house without us knowing? For how long? Where had he been hiding during the day? The officers did another sweep of the house, checking every closet, the attic, the crawl spaces. They found nothing else suspicious, but they did find evidence that someone had been in the attic. A small pile of food wrappers, a water bottle, even a makeshift bed made from old coats we'd stored up there. I couldn't stay in the house that night. I called my parents, who were understandably freaked out and immediately started driving back. I stayed at Anthony's place until they got home. The police told us later that the man was homeless with a history of mental illness. He didn't tell them how long he'd been in our house, just kept saying cryptically that he was waiting for the right time. The right time for what, he wouldn't say. We changed all the locks, installed a security system, and made sure every window was secure. But I still can't shake the feeling of violation. Every creak, every normal house noise makes me freeze now. What haunts me most is the uncertainty. Had he really just broken in that weekend? Or had he been there longer, watching us, moving around at night while we slept? Was it really him I heard the first night, or was that actually one of my friends? And why the hatred in his eyes when he looked at me? What had I done to deserve that look? I don't think I'll ever know. And honestly, maybe that's for the best. Story 16. I'm writing this down because I still can't sleep right, even though it's been almost 8 months since it happened. I guess I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar or has some insight. I was 16 when this happened. I'd been working at Luigi's Pizza in Pinewood Hollow for about 6 months, mostly making pizzas and working the counter. It's a small town. Nothing ever happens here, or at least that's what I thought. After saving up enough money from my minimum wage job, I finally bought this beat-up 2008 Honda Civic. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, and it meant I could start doing deliveries instead of being stuck inside the shop all night. The delivery guys always made better tips, so I was excited about the extra cash. That night started like any other shift. It was a Wednesday in October, and I was scheduled until 10:30. The first few hours were actually pretty busy. Lots of families ordering dinner, the usual midweek rush. But around 8, things got really quiet. By 9, I was just sitting around folding pizza boxes while Marco, the manager, was cleaning up the kitchen. Then the computer chimed with an online order. 2 medium pepperonis. I remember being relieved because I was bored out of my mind. The address was for Cedar Lane, which is this winding road that goes through the wooded part of town. It's mostly older houses spread pretty far apart, some right on the road, others with long driveways going back into the trees. I loaded the pizzas in my car, cranked up my music, and headed out. It was dark already, and the streets were practically empty, which wasn't unusual for a weeknight in Pinewood. I was about halfway there when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. Some car had pulled out from Maple Street and was now behind me. No big deal, right? But after a couple minutes, I realized this car was just following. Not tailgating or anything, just maintaining the same distance. The road was wide open, no traffic at all, but they weren't passing me. I was only going like 35 in a 45 zone because I wasn't in a hurry. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured maybe they were just heading in the same direction or were confused about where they were going. But then I turned onto Forest View Road, which leads to Cedar Lane, and the car turned too. That's when I started feeling this weird tingle at the back of my neck. Cedar Lane is even darker than the main roads. There are barely any street lights, and the houses are scattered with these stretches of dense woods between them. I remember gripping my steering wheel tighter and checking my mirrors every few seconds. The car was still there, keeping pace. When I finally found the house number on a mailbox, I felt relieved. I signaled and turned into the long driveway, watching as the car continued down the road. I let out this breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Just paranoia, I thought. The driveway curved through some trees before opening up to a small one-story house. It looked pretty old, with a covered porch and a porch light that was on, but I couldn't see any lights inside the house itself. I grabbed the pizza bags, walked up to the door, and knocked. No answer. I waited about 30 seconds and knocked again, louder this time. After another minute, I saw a light come on inside, and the door opened. This woman, who looked maybe in her early 30s, stood there in a nightgown and robe. Her hair was messy, and she had this confused, half-asleep look on her face. I still remember how her eyes narrowed when she saw me standing there with the pizza bags. "Hi, sorry to bother you so late," I said. "I have your delivery, 2 medium pepperonis." She looked at me like I was speaking another language. "I didn't order any pizza," she said, pulling her robe tighter. I pulled out my phone to check the order. "This is 117 Cedar Lane, right?" "Yes, but I didn't order anything. I was asleep." Her voice had this edge to it now, not angry, more like scared. "I'm really sorry about this," I said, feeling my face getting hot with embarrassment. "Someone must have put in the wrong address or something." She nodded but didn't close the door. Instead, she glanced past me toward the driveway. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just a mix-up. Sorry for waking you." I turned to head back to my car, but that's when I saw it. The same car that had been following me was now parked at the bottom of the driveway, blocking the exit. Its headlights were off, but I could see the engine was running from the exhaust in the cold air. My heart dropped into my stomach. The woman must have seen something change in my face because she stepped forward. "What is it?" she asked, looking down the driveway. "That car, it was following me earlier," I managed to say. My voice sounded weird, like it was coming from somewhere else. Before she could respond, I saw the doors of the car open. 4 guys got out. Even from that distance, I could see they were all wearing hoodies with the hoods up and some kind of shirts or bandanas pulled up over the lower half of their faces. One of them seemed to have his hand in his pocket, gripping something. And then they started running up the driveway toward me. I don't even remember thinking. I just dropped the pizza bags and sprinted to my car. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine started and I slammed it into reverse, but I realized there wasn't enough room to turn around without getting close to them. The woman had disappeared inside, and I heard her door slam and lock. I couldn't blame her. These guys were getting closer, maybe 50 feet away now. I made a split-second decision and tried to drive around them by cutting across the yard. But in the dark, I didn't see this big oak tree until it was too late. I swerved, but the passenger side of my car still clipped it. The impact wasn't that bad, but it was enough to deploy the airbag and stun me for a second. When I looked up, one of the guys was almost at my driver's side door. That's when pure fear took over. I unbuckled my seatbelt, pushed the deflating airbag aside, and threw open the door into him, knocking him back. Then I just ran. I ran straight into the woods beside the house, pushing through branches and stumbling over roots I couldn't see. I could hear at least one of them crashing through the trees behind me and someone shouting, "Get him!" I was terrified they all had weapons, so I just kept running deeper into the forest. I don't know how long I ran, maybe 5 minutes. It felt like hours. Eventually, I couldn't hear anyone behind me anymore, but I was too scared to stop. I found this fallen tree and crouched behind it, trying to control my breathing so I wouldn't make noise. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and called 911. The dispatcher kept trying to get me to calm down enough to explain where I was, but I was hyperventilating and couldn't even form complete sentences at first. Eventually, I managed to tell her I was in the woods somewhere, off Cedar Lane, that I'd been chased by multiple men who might be armed, and that my car was crashed in someone's yard. She told me to stay hidden and that officers were on their way. I stayed there, crouched behind that log for what must have been 30 minutes, jumping at every sound, convinced they were still searching for me. When I finally heard sirens, I waited until I saw the flashing lights through the trees before I even considered moving. I used my phone's flashlight to find my way back, still terrified I might run into those guys. When I emerged from the woods, there were 2 police cars in the driveway. The woman who answered the door was talking to one officer, looking upset and scared. My car was still there by the tree, driver's door hanging open, but the other car was gone. So were the men. I gave my statement to the police. They searched the area but found nothing. The woman confirmed she'd seen the men running toward me but had immediately locked her door and called 911 herself. The craziest part? When I went to get my stuff from my car the next day, my dad drove me. It was gone, completely vanished. The police said there was no record of it being towed. Someone had come back and taken it during the night. The investigation revealed the pizza order had been placed online using a stolen credit card. The police believe these guys were using random addresses to lure delivery drivers to isolated locations. They never found my car or identified any of the men. I still don't know what they wanted. Maybe they were just going to rob me. Maybe they wanted my car. Or maybe they had something worse planned for some random kid delivering pizzas on a quiet Wednesday night. I quit my job the next day. I can't drive at night anymore without constantly checking my mirrors. I'm paranoid about cars following me, even in broad daylight. And I still have nightmares about what might have happened if I hadn't gotten away. What scares me most is knowing they're still out there, and I have no idea why they picked me. Story 17. I still struggle to talk about what happened to me during that voyage in 1828. I've spent years trying to make sense of it, but some experiences defy explanation, no matter how many times you turn them over in your mind. I was serving as first mate aboard the merchant vessel Covenanter under Captain William Morton, a seasoned sailor from Bristol with 30 years at sea. We were on a typical North Atlantic route, carrying textiles and manufactured goods from Liverpool to Halifax. It was early March, and the weather had been unforgiving. Bitter cold with fierce winds that seemed determined to push us off course. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you question why you ever chose a life at sea. That morning started like any other. The skies were leaden gray, and patches of ice floated in the distance. We were somewhere north of Newfoundland, navigating waters known for their treachery, especially that time of year. Captain Morton had ordered me to recalculate our coordinates after the previous night's storm had blown us slightly off course. I was in my stateroom, hunched over charts and navigation tables. The ship creaked and groaned against the waves, a sound I'd grown so accustomed to that I barely noticed it anymore. The captain's cabin adjoined mine, separated only by a thin wooden door that was usually left partially open to allow for easy communication between us. I remember glancing at my pocket watch. It was just past 10 in the morning when something made me look up. Through the half-open door, I could see someone sitting at the captain's desk. At first, I assumed it was Captain Morton, though I was surprised he'd returned from the deck without my noticing. But as I turned to address him, the words died in my throat. It wasn't the captain. A stranger sat there, calmly writing on the captain's slate. He wore unfamiliar clothing, not the standard sailor's garb, but something I couldn't quite place. His face was gaunt, with hollow cheeks and skin so pale it seemed almost translucent in the dim cabin light. What struck me most, though, were his eyes, dark, deep-set, and utterly vacant. They reminded me of the eyes of a corpse I'd once seen pulled from the Thames. "Who are you?" I managed to call out, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "How did you get aboard?" The man looked directly at me then, and I swear the temperature in the room plummeted. His gaze held mine for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Something about his presence sent waves of dread washing over me. a sense of wrongness that I couldn't articulate but felt down to my marrow. I'm not proud to admit it, but I bolted. 34 years old and a veteran of numerous voyages, yet I ran from that cabin like a terrified child. I burst onto the main deck, heart hammering against my ribs, gulping the frigid air in desperate breaths. Captain Morton was at the helm, conferring with the helmsman. He took one look at my face and strode toward me, concern etching his weathered features. "Bruce, man, you look like you've seen the devil himself," he said, gripping my shoulder with a gloved hand. I tried to explain what I'd seen, the words tumbling out incoherently at first. The captain listened, his expression changing from concern to skepticism. "A stowaway? Impossible," he declared. "We've been at sea for 12 days. No one could hide aboard that long without being discovered." "I know what I saw, sir," I insisted, my voice steadier now that I was in the familiar company of the crew. "There's someone in your cabin, writing on your slate." The captain's thick eyebrows drew together. "Well then, let's go see this mysterious visitor, shall we?" We descended below decks, the captain leading with confident strides while I followed, dread building with each step. What if the stranger was still there? Worse yet, what if he wasn't? Captain Morton flung open the door to his cabin without hesitation. It was empty, no sign of the pale-faced man. The captain's things lay undisturbed, exactly as he'd left them hours earlier. "There's no one here, Bruce," he said, turning to me with a mixture of irritation and concern. "Perhaps you've been working too hard. The cold and isolation play tricks on a man's mind sometimes." I shook my head firmly. "I saw him, Captain, as clearly as I see you now." I moved to the desk, scanning it for evidence, and there it was, the slate the man had been writing on. But instead of the navigational calculations that should have been there, 3 words were scrawled in an unfamiliar hand: "Steer to the northwest." Captain Morton stared at the message, his face draining of color. "I didn't write this," he said quietly. "Did you?" I shook my head, my throat suddenly dry. "That's what he was writing when I saw him." The captain picked up the slate, examining it closely. "This handwriting belongs to neither of us." He looked at me sharply. "Are you certain you saw someone?" "On my life, sir." Captain Morton paced the small cabin, clearly troubled. He was a practical man, not given to superstition despite his many years at sea. But the evidence before him defied rational explanation. After several minutes of silent deliberation, he made a decision that still astonishes me to this day. "We'll change course," he announced, "northwest as the message directs." "Sir?" I couldn't hide my surprise. Captain Morton was not a man who deviated from planned routes without compelling reason. "I don't know what to make of this business, Bruce, but in all my years at sea, I've learned that sometimes it's wiser to heed unusual warnings than to dismiss them." He handed me the slate. "Update the helmsman. Northwest it is." I did as ordered, though my hands trembled slightly as I relayed the new course. The crew exchanged glances but asked no questions. At sea, you follow the captain's orders no matter how strange they might seem. For the next few hours, we sailed northwest through increasingly hazardous waters. Ice floes became more numerous, forcing us to navigate with extreme caution. The wind had picked up, driving stinging pellets of sleet against our faces. I stayed on deck despite the punishing conditions, unable to shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. It was nearing 4 in the afternoon, the weak winter sun already sinking toward the horizon, when the lookout's cry pierced the howling wind. "Ship ahead, starboard bow." We all rushed to the railings, straining to see through the curtain of sleet. Sure enough, about a mile distant, the dark shape of a vessel emerged from the gloom. As we drew closer, my stomach tightened with dread. The ship was listing badly, trapped in the ice. No movement could be seen on her deck. "She's in trouble," Captain Morton muttered beside me. "Prepare to render assistance." We approached as close as we safely could, eventually dropping anchor about 200 yards from the stricken vessel. The captain ordered a rescue party, and I volunteered immediately. Something pulled me toward that ship, a compulsion I couldn't ignore. Launching the boats in those conditions was treacherous work. The sea wasn't rough, but the floating ice made rowing a constant challenge. By the time we reached the vessel, my hands were numb despite my gloves. Up close, we could see she was a Quebec trading ship named the Margaret. Her hull was badly damaged where the ice had crushed it, and frost covered her rigging like a ghostly shroud. When we boarded, the scene that greeted us was one of desperate hardship. The crew and passengers, 19 souls in all, were in the final stages of starvation. They had been trapped in the ice for nearly 2 weeks, their provisions exhausted with no means of signaling for help. Many were too weak to stand, huddled in blankets in the ship's main cabin, their sunken eyes regarding us with disbelief as if we were apparitions rather than flesh and blood rescuers. As we began helping the weakest passengers to our boats, I moved through the cabin, checking for anyone who might have been overlooked. In the corner, wrapped in a tattered coat, sat a man with his head bowed. When he looked up at my approach, I nearly lost my footing. It was him, the stranger from the captain's cabin, the same gaunt face, the same hollow eyes. Only now, those eyes were filled with recognition. "You," he whispered, his voice cracked from thirst. "I saw you earlier, on another ship." My blood seemed to freeze in my veins. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, the same question I'd failed to get answered hours before. "James Harrington," he replied. "I'm the ship's navigator." With trembling hands, I helped him to his feet. He was weak but able to walk with assistance. As we made our way slowly to the waiting boat, he spoke again. "I had the strangest experience this morning," he said. "I was so tired, so cold. I must have fallen into some kind of trance. I dreamed I was on another ship, a merchant vessel. I was in a cabin, writing something important, a message." He looked at me intently. "And you were there. You saw me." I couldn't speak. The implications of what he was saying were too overwhelming. Back aboard the Covenanter, after all the survivors had been brought over and given food, water, and warm blankets, Captain Morton called me and Harrington to his cabin. The captain had noticed my reaction to the navigator and demanded an explanation. When Harrington saw the slate, still bearing the message, "Steer to the northwest," his face paled even further. "That's my handwriting," he said quietly. "In my dream, vision, whatever it was, I knew our position. I knew we needed help, and somehow I knew your ship was close enough to reach us. I was trying to write directions." Captain Morton looked between us, his expression unreadable. "You expect me to believe that your spirit, or whatever you want to call it, appeared on my ship and wrote this message?" Harrington shook his head slowly. "I don't expect you to believe anything, Captain. I don't understand it myself. All I know is that 19 people, myself included, are alive because of it." The captain was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Well, whatever happened, I suppose we should be grateful for the outcome." He dismissed us then, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. Later that night, I found Harrington on deck, staring out at the dark waters where his ship still sat trapped in the ice. "How did you do it?" I asked him. "How did you appear in our cabin?" He turned to me, his eyes haunted. "I don't know. I was certain we were all going to die. I was praying, begging for help, trying to focus every ounce of my remaining strength on somehow reaching someone." He paused. "Have you ever been so desperate that you felt you could push beyond the normal boundaries of what's possible?" I hadn't, not until that day. We reached Halifax 3 days later, and the survivors of the Margaret were taken to hospitals and boarding houses to recover. Harrington and I spoke once more before parting ways. Neither of us had answers, only questions that would never be fully resolved. That was 22 years ago. I've sailed many voyages since, risen to captain my own vessel, but I've never encountered anything like that day near Newfoundland. Sometimes I wonder if it really happened the way I remember it. But then I take out the small piece of slate I kept. Captain Morton let me have it. And I see those 3 words in Harrington's handwriting. And I know it was real. I've heard stories over the years of sailors experiencing strange things at sea. The isolation, the vastness of the ocean, the constant danger. Perhaps these conditions sometimes thin the veil between what we understand and what we don't. Or perhaps when human need is desperate enough, something extraordinary can happen. All I know for certain is that 19 people lived because a dying man somehow reached across miles of ocean to deliver a message. And I, Robert Bruce of Torbay, was there to receive it. Story 18. I've been putting off sharing this for 2 years now. Maybe writing it out will help me process what happened, because I still don't understand it. I'm not even sure I want to. It was August 3 years ago when me and 4 friends decided to go hiking in the Carpathian Mountains. I'd done plenty of camping before, but never in Romania. Alex had family there and had been talking up the mountains for years. How wild and untouched they were compared to the overcrowded trails back home. "Trust me," he kept saying. "It's like stepping back in time. No tourists, no gift shops, just pure wilderness." The 5 of us, me, Alex, Sarah, Mike, and Danny, flew into Bucharest, then took a bus to this tiny village at the foot of the mountains. I remember the old men sitting outside the only store in town, staring at us as we loaded our backpacks. One of them said something to Alex in Romanian that made Alex laugh uncomfortably. "What did he say?" I asked. "Just warning us about bears," Alex replied. But something about his tone felt off. I didn't push it. We were all excited to get started. The first 2 days were incredible. The forests were dense and ancient, massive beech trees with trunks wider than cars. We followed animal trails more than actual hiking paths. It felt primal, like we were the first people to walk there in centuries, though obviously that wasn't true. We occasionally saw signs of logging or old shepherds' huts. On the 3rd day, we hiked up to this gorgeous alpine meadow surrounded by rocky peaks. It was early evening, the sun casting this golden light across the tall grass. Perfect spot to camp. "Guys, I think we hit the jackpot," Mike said, dropping his pack. The only odd thing was the cowpats. They were everywhere, dried ones, fresh ones, more than you'd expect. "Local farmers let their cattle graze up here in summer," Alex explained. "We probably won't see them, though. They usually keep them on the move." We set up our 3 tents in a small cluster, me and Danny in one, Alex and Mike in another, and Sarah had her own smaller tent. We cooked dinner on our portable stove, passed around a flask of whiskey, and watched the stars come out. The night was so clear you could see the Milky Way stretching across the sky. We were laughing, telling stories, completely at peace. I remember thinking how lucky we were to experience this, how perfect everything was. I fell asleep to the sound of wind rustling through the grass and Danny's soft snoring beside me. I woke up to something else entirely. It was that pre-dawn darkness, maybe 4 in the morning, when the world feels suspended between night and day. At first, I thought the rumbling was thunder, but then I realized it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Hooves, dozens of them, and mixed in with the hoofbeats, bellowing, low guttural sounds that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "Danny," I whispered, shaking him. "Wake up." "What?" he mumbled. "Listen." The sounds were getting closer. I unzipped our tent just enough to peer out. In the dim light, I could make out shapes moving toward us. Cows, a lot of them. They were emerging from the tree line, spreading out across the meadow. In my groggy state, I wasn't immediately alarmed. Cows are harmless, right? Just big, docile farm animals. But something felt wrong. The way they moved, too coordinated, too purposeful. And they were coming straight for our campsite. I crawled out of the tent, standing up slowly. The nearest cow was maybe 30 feet away, staring directly at me. Not grazing, not moving, just watching. Others were fanning out, surrounding our campsite in an almost perfect circle. "Guys," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Guys, wake up." Alex's head poked out of his tent. "What the?" And that's when I saw it. At first, it was just another shape in the darkness, but as it moved closer, separating itself from the herd, I realized what I was looking at. A bull, pure white, massive beyond anything I'd ever seen before. Its shoulders stood higher than my head, muscles rippling under its hide with each step. But it was the eyes that froze me in place, milky white, almost glowing in the darkness and completely devoid of expression. They didn't blink, not once. "Holy shit," Sarah whispered from her tent entrance. The bull stopped about 20 feet from us, just stood there. The rest of the herd, I could now see there were at least 60 or 70 cows, had formed a perfect circle around our campsite. No gaps, no way out. "Don't move," Alex whispered. "Nobody make any sudden movements." We all stood frozen, barely breathing. The only sound was the occasional snort from one of the cows and the continuous sound of them shifting their weight, hooves pressing into the soft earth. Minutes passed like this. The sky lightened slightly, enough that I could see more details. The bull's hide wasn't just white. It had this unnatural sheen to it, almost glowing against the dark landscape. And I could now see its face clearly. The broad forehead, the thick, curved horns that looked sharp enough to impale a car. "What do we do?" Mike whispered. "Wait them out," Alex said. "They'll move on when the sun comes up." But they didn't. As dawn broke fully across the meadow, the herd remained in position. The bull hadn't moved an inch, its eyes fixed on us with an intelligence that felt impossible for an animal. "Maybe we should pack up," Sarah suggested. "Slowly make our way out of here." Danny nodded. "I'll get our—" He never finished his sentence. The moment he took a step toward our tent, the bull charged. I've seen videos of bull charges before. They paw the ground, lower their heads, give some warning. This wasn't like that. 1 second the bull was stationary, the next it was moving at full speed. 1,000 pounds of muscle and horn aimed directly at Danny. Danny dove to the side just in time. The bull plowed straight into our tent, collapsing it instantly, then skidded to a stop on the other side. It turned, pawing the ground, those dead eyes scanning us one by one. "What the fuck?" Mike shouted. "What the actual fuck?" The bull snorted, its breath visible in the cool morning air. Then, with deliberate slowness, it walked back to its original position and stopped again, resuming its watching. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Danny was shaking, still on the ground where he'd landed. Our tent was destroyed, our sleeping bags and gear scattered across the grass. "That's not normal," Sarah whispered. "Bulls don't act like that." She was right. This wasn't random aggression. It felt calculated, like the bull was testing us, showing us what would happen if we tried to leave. We huddled together, backs against Alex and Mike's tent, watching the herd watching us. The cows remained in their circle, occasionally shifting position, but never breaking the formation. The bull stood like a sentinel, muscles twitching under its hide, ready to charge again at the slightest provocation. "Alex," I said quietly, "you said these are local farmers' cattle, but who the hell owns a bull like that? And why would they just let it wander around?" Alex shook his head. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like this before." An hour passed, then another. The sun rose higher, warming the meadow. We were hungry, thirsty, and terrified. Our food and most of our water was in our packs, which were now partly trapped under the collapsed tent. None of us dared to retrieve them. Around what must have been 8 in the morning, Mike spotted something that made my blood run colder. "Look at their backs," he whispered. I hadn't noticed it before, but now, in the full light of day, I could see what he meant. Each cow had these strange markings across their backs, not brands or tags, but what looked like scars, deliberate patterns, too uniform to be accidental. "What the hell is that?" Danny asked. Nobody answered. Nobody knew. The third hour came and went. We were getting desperate. Sarah had to pee but was afraid to move more than a few feet away from us. Mike was talking about making a run for it, just sprinting through the herd and hoping for the best. "That's suicide," Alex hissed. "Did you see how fast that thing moved?" The tension was unbearable. Every minute felt like an hour. The sun beat down on us, and still the herd remained, silent sentinels with the white bull at their center. Then, sometime during the 4th hour, something changed. A cow at the far edge of the circle moved slightly, turning its head toward the forest. Then another. The white bull's ears twitched. "Something's happening," I whispered. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the circle began to break. Cows at the edges started drifting away, moving toward the tree line. Not all at once, but gradually, like a tide receding. The white bull remained in place, still watching us. But I could sense its attention was divided now. After what felt like forever, even the bull began to back away. It never turned its back on us, kept those milky eyes fixed in our direction as it slowly retreated. When it reached the edge of the trees, it stopped one last time. The rest of the herd had disappeared into the forest, but the bull lingered, staring at us with those empty eyes. Then it let out a sound, not a bellow or a snort, but something deeper, almost like a human voice trying to form words. And then it was gone, vanishing into the shadows of the trees. We didn't move for at least 20 minutes, afraid it was a trap. When we finally did, we moved as one, grabbing only the essentials from our gear. Nobody spoke. We just packed what we could and got the hell out of there, heading in the opposite direction from where the herd had gone. We hiked for hours, putting as much distance between us and that meadow as possible. Found another campsite near a stream, miles away. We were exhausted, but none of us wanted to stop any sooner. That night, huddled around our fire, we finally talked about it. "That wasn't normal," Sarah kept saying. "I grew up around farms. Bulls are dangerous, but they don't act like that. They don't coordinate with a herd like that." "Maybe it was rabid," Danny suggested, but none of us believed it. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those milky white eyes staring at me. judging me. And even over the sound of the stream, I swear I could hear hoofbeats in the distance, watching, waiting. We cut our trip short, made our way back to the village the next day. The same old men were sitting outside the store. One of them noticed our faces, how shaken we looked. He said something to Alex, who turned pale. I asked him what the man said. Alex wouldn't tell me at first, but I pressed him. He asked if we saw the white bull, Alex finally admitted. Said we're lucky to be alive. I wanted to go back, to ask the old man what he meant, but Alex refused to translate anymore. We left that day, barely speaking on the journey back to Bucharest. It's been 3 years. I still have nightmares about those eyes. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I can hear hooves on the pavement outside my apartment. I've tried researching local folklore, looking for any mention of a white bull in Carpathian mythology. Found nothing concrete. The others don't talk about it. We've drifted apart, actually. It's like what happened in those mountains broke something between us, some shared understanding of how the world works. All I know is that what we encountered wasn't just an animal. There was purpose there, intelligence. And sometimes, when I'm alone and it's quiet, I can still hear that sound it made before disappearing. That almost human voice, trying to tell us something I'm afraid to understand.